Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 1 of What If Naruto Was in Justice League. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. The city was beautiful. Tall skyscrapers, bright lights, beautiful views, the sounds of life itself as it people moved about. And none of them made any sense to the observer, and for good reason, as this observer in question happened to be not from this world. And at this very moment, he was trying to figure out just what he was going to do now that he was getting into reach of this city. Where in the name of the kami am I? Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki had no idea what he was doing here in this world right now, and while he was still able to remain hidden while he was in the forest outside of the city. Everything that he was looking at right now was something that he had never seen before, and it was something that made the blonde shinobi from Konoha all the more confused by what he was looking at this very moment. The blonde looked about, and the roads were unlike anything he had seen before in his life. The strange metal-looking carts didn't have any horses or people moving them to their destination, and every so often he spotted smoke coming from some sort of pipe that was behind them. There were more of the strange things, and they were of different sizes to boot as he looked at the things carefully and tried to make some sense of it all. He had seen some things like those in his travels in the elemental countries as well as his trip to Snow Spring Country, but they were nothing like the ones that he was seeing before him right now. And the buildings, sure, the buildings in places like Iwa, Konoha, Suna, and several others were tall, but there were no buildings this size in all of his travels at all, and this added even more to the confusion that was hitting the blonde. He, however, decided that he might as well go back to his place and try to make some sense on what he was doing here in this world that seemed to defy just about everything that he knew of. In a nearby clearing in the forest, Naruto sat down in the clearing and managed to calm down and begin to piece together what had happened earlier. He had been on a mission, possibly his last mission for Konoha before he had come here, as he began to think on the events. It had already been 3 years since he formally handed the title of Hokage to Konohamaru and decided to travel around the elemental countries. Most ninja would have been marked as missing nin and hunted down, but he was a special case for a number of reasons. The first was his actions in the Fourth Shinobi War, which ended in victory for the Shinobi Alliance and resulted in the defeat of Uchiha Madara, Kabuto Yakushi, and his former friend Sasuke Uchiha. He had managed to accomplish his father's hopes in defeating Madara to save the world and honor his mother Kushina as well, and while he had not killed Sasuke, he had finally put an end to his former friend's plans for revenge. It had hurt him to know that nothing he could do would change Sasuke, and he wished that there was another way, but he was not young anymore. He had grown up, and while he did not kill Sasuke, he did not let him win. The power left to him by Itachi proved to be the key to stop Sasuke, and when that was over, he advocated full exile for him. The power given to him by Itachi cancelled out Sasuke's own eternal Magankyo Sharingan, and this allowed him to blind Sasuke forever, which was why he decided not to kill Sasuke. Sasuke cursed him for this, but he replied that he could handle it, for he was a shinobi and willing to take the pain and the hatred to change the world. The second was the fact that he was hailed as a hero and savior of the ninja world, and while there had been some resistance to his desire to reform the shinobi system, the others agreed with him. He rose to heroic status not just in Konoha but in other places as well, and as such, his name was recognized literally worldwide. The third was his being the new Hokage. Tsunade formally stepped down from being Hokage months after the end of the war and gave the title to him. That was shocking, as by all rights he was still a genin, but many ninja agreed that he was no longer a genin in their eyes. His accomplishments and his powers made him cage material many times over, and while he tried to discount it, many people began to state that he was the sage of the Six Paths Reborn. He took the position, and while he admitted that he had no idea how to actually be a Hokage, he was more than willing to learn and do his best, which was why he formally asked Tsunade, Kakashi, Shizune, and Yamato to be his advisors. Though the last of the Sannin did not like it, she accepted it out of her respect for him, and he was thankful for her advice and that of his new council and his friends. His reign as Hokage was interesting, and while paperwork was a pain in the neck for him, he was not going to turn down his responsibilities, and besides, his Kage Bushin Jutsu cut down the time he needed for that part of his work. Apart from that, he had been working for the restoration and rebuilding of Konoha after the war, and he was pleased in those days to have so many friends in different places in the world. The fact that he was able to have such allies made Konoha a lot stronger politically, diplomatically, and economically. And while there had been battles that he had to be part of, he was more than willing to go all out and do what he could for the people of not just Konoha, but for all the nations, which further cemented his legacy as Hokage and earned him the title of the legendary Orange Hokage, an odd title to be sure, but he did not mind, as he had a feeling his father Minato Namikaze and his mother Kushina Uzumaki would have enjoyed it. And the last was his being the head of the newly revived Uzumaki clan. When he took the position of Hokage, he had been given the shock of his life when he was informed by Tsunade and Shikaku about the law regarding clans, namely when only one male heir is left. Tsunade explained that since he was by all rights the last of the fabled Uzumaki clan, he had a duty to rebuild the clan, and that meant being married, and it was recommended that he would be allowed to have more than one wife. That made him blush to the point that he felt like steam was going to come out of his ears. Much to the amusement of everyone, he swore that Tsunade seemed to take some slightly perverse pleasure in him being like this, and even Kakashi was grinning from ear to ear underneath that darn mask of his. When that announcement came out into the open about his full lineage, and the events of that night, it unleashed a torrent of changes in Konoha. The ones who had once disliked and hated him were ashamed to know that they had spent a good deal of time harming the son of the fourth Hokage and also the hero of the whole ninja world. He had spent a large amount of time to assure them all that he had no desire to harm them for what they had done and explained that he had grown up already. He was not the same young boy they knew and he had no hatred in his heart for them. He had made peace with himself and their reasons for hating them. The only thing he wanted from them was to recognize him not as the son of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki, but as a ninja of Konoha and a young man of worth. He wanted them to also recognize him for his own accomplishments and not for the legacy of his father, since he was like his father in wanting to succeed through hard work and effort. The villagers were more than happy to do that and were in full support of him. That was also when he had to deal with the fact that he needed to take a wife, or rather several wives, in order to found the clan. He did have perverted dreams about being with more than one woman at times, but he was not sure that he was ready for such a thing happening to him in real life, even if it was officially sanctioned by law. He still had feelings for Sakura but was not sure if she felt the same, and of course there was the situation between him and Hinata that had not yet been resolved after the Fourth Shinobi War. He recalled her confession to him when she was facing pain despite the fact that by all rights she had no chance before him, and he was still shocked by it and trying to make sense on how to properly respond to her confession. They were not on bad terms with one another, but it was still awkward for him to know that she felt that strongly for him. That was why he decided to take some more time to think about what he was going to do before he made his decision on following this law or not. After a while he managed to speak to both Hinata and Sakura, and it surprised him that Sakura was aware of Hinata's love for him and was actually all right with it. And in turn she spoke that over time she had indeed developed feelings for him as well, wishing to make sure that she did what she could to make up for all that he had done for her as well as try again if he wanted her to do so. This had been a long discussion between the three of them, and it was not long before the three came to an agreement to at least take the time to work on their feelings. He got the surprise of his life when they were even willing to share him as well, and if he wanted, they were willing to marry him. The idea of being married to the two of them was something that surprised the blonde Hokage, and he replied that he needed time to think about going that far. However, it was not long before Hinata and Sakura were not the only women who would make that statement to him. Amaru came to him and was there to say that she was willing to marry him as well and help in what he would need in taking care of his people as well himself, along with being a doctor to him. She was also followed by Shion herself as the priestess ruler of the land of demons, wanted to further ties between her people and Naruto's own people as well as aid him if he needed someone to help him fight any other demons that might rise to be threats to the world, not to mention that she wanted to remind him of his promise to help her pass her powers to a new priestess. The whole situation was further complicated somewhat by the arrival of Koyuki herself, who wanted to cement a more beneficial and permanent alliance with Konoha, and the only way to do that was by marriage, and it was obvious who she had in mind as her husband, further confounding Naruto. The next shocker was the fact that the current Mizukage, Mei Terumi, was also interested in forging better ties with Konoha, plus seeing him seemed to have gained her interest a great deal, making him shake his head at this. Not to mention the other women from in Fire Country and outside the elemental nations as well who came to offer their hands in marriage as well. He knew that most guys would love this situation, and so was he, but this was too sudden to his liking. The good news was that at least he was given the time to build his relationships with them, and that was something he was utterly thankful for. Eventually he began to get used to being around the women who wanted to be with him and developed relationships with them, though the most prominent were with Hinata and Sakura as they were close to him in many ways. His other relationships, which were with Koyuki, Mei, Amaru, and Shion, also grew over time, and for that he was very thankful, as it made the whole situation a lot more tolerant to him until it was time for him to get married once he made his choice, though he parted in amicable terms with the others who sought him as a husband. The whole affair was celebrated in Konoha as delegates from every corner of the elemental nations came to see the event. After all, it was not every day that the hero of the ninja world was going to be married, and to women with considerable talents to say the very least. Of course he had to deal with the fact that his male friends were curious about how the wedding night was for him. He was able to keep his trap shut, but they had no problems guessing that it was quite the experience for him when he was blushing to the point he would have easily surpassed Hinata in the bushing department. Kakashi was utterly amused and had no problem needling him, though in a good way, and even Iruka and Yamato laughed at it while Sai just smiled in his usual fashion, though this time around, the smile was not forced in any possible way and was actually real. Afterwards, he was now taking his duties very seriously, and while there were ages of peace in the land, there were still those who sought to incite war and chaos, so his work was hardly over. But with all the support he was getting, he was more than ready and willing to go all out in order to see that such threats would be dealt with through peaceful means before going to force when all else failed. Not to mention his wives were more than willing to teach him a number of skills and techniques to help him if there was a chance that they could not be by his side. And he finally felt the same joy he had seen his father Minato had when he was born, when he also saw his children being born. It was sad to him that neither his parents were able to see him finally have children. He could easily guess that his mother Kushina would have lovingly doted on her grandchildren while his father Minato would take pride in training them in his free time and when he was not busy. But he had no doubt in his mind that they were watching him in the afterlife, and no doubt his sensei the pervy sage Jiraiya was enjoying it as well. There was no doubt in his mind that the white-haired perverted ninja would have written a whole library worth of smut after what he had seen as well. He also took to heart that his children would be another reason along with so many other youths for him to defend Konoha for as long as he could and be able to. And he in turn would defend his grandchildren when they too would be born. But like anything else, there was a bad side to things, namely in his Uzumaki heritage. He aged slower than the women he married, and due to that bloodline from his mother, it was hard for him to know that he was not going to be able to grow old with them, even more so with the Kyuubi's purified chakra giving him a very high healing factor that made him heal faster and better. This made him become a living symbol of the name of the Uzumaki clan. Initially he was able to deal with it, but it was not long before it was going to be painful for him, as he knew that his loved ones would pass on long before he would. Sakura and the others understood it and did their best to assure him that they did not have any problems with it, but they did insist to him that he should not burden himself if they passed away while he was still alive, and lived to enjoy the world. He promised them that, but it was not easy for him in any sense, as he had done so much and he was not afraid to die. He was even interested to finally meet his parents and even the pervy sage along with the third Hokage. To know that it would be a long time before he himself reached his end was hard to accept at times, and the following deaths were hard on him. First was Tsunade, who passed on after so many years, though she died with a smile on her face and being surrounded by his children and grandchildren who she had become a godmother and great godmother to. She was soon joined by Shizune, who had at least been able to marry, and Taruka no less, who also joined her in death, succeeded by their own children. Both were truly important to him, as Shizune was like a big sister to him and a god aunt to his children and grandchildren, and Aruka was like his big brother father figure. Kakashi himself finally passed on as well, though he had at least been married to a Yame and had two children who now served as Jonin, and they too had grandchildren who were going to be great ninja as well, like their grandfather. He honored his former teacher and placed his name alongside his own teammates and their Jonin sensei, his father, and he made sure that Ayame's own funeral was well planned out, as she and her also long dead father were two more people he loved and treasured in life. His own classmates were also long gone, though they too lived good lives, which was why he was able to deal with their passing on, though it was hardly a simple affair. Ino and Sai passed on, though they were married and had children when they died. It still amazed him that they were even married, and Sai admitted that being married to Ino was interesting to say the least. He was proud that their children were doing their parents proud, and so did their grandchildren. He had no idea just how the two even managed to finally tie the knot, but he also knew that Ino was happy and Sai was being genuine about being married to her. Neji and Tenten were also married, something that he found rather funny when he was told of their engagement. He had a feeling that sooner or later, Tenten's support for Neji was going to turn romantic at some point and time. And he was not alone either, as Hinata used to tell him that her cousin thought of his teammate a lot more than he used to after the war. They too passed away together, and he made sure that both were buried side by side since they had been working well as a team both in the battlefield and out of it. Shikamaru finally got out and married Temari as well, and for that he was utterly amused, considering Temari's bossy nature and Shikamaru's dislike for bossy women. But at least despite their differences, they did get along, and at least his lazy teammate finally managed to win Konkuro and Gaara's approval of him marrying their sister. Most guys steered clear of Temari due to her brothers, but Shikamaru finally managed to win their support, and despite his worries, he discovered that his dad was right about women being different with their loved ones. He and Gaara were the ones to oversee the funeral respectively, and it was a hard thing to do. Rock Lee managed to finally be a Jonin and rise to the same level of his sensei Guy at his prime as well. This was something that Guy was proud of. And to the amusement of everyone. Even Kurenai Lee was able to finally meet the love of his life. Yakumo herself had spent time with Lee, and while she could not be a ninja alongside him, she proved to be a person who Lee cared deeply about. Lee loved Yakumo and she had those very same feelings as well, and they were able to have some children of their own, and Yakumo was able to see them all grow to adulthood despite the weakness of her body. In the end though, Yakumo died due to her frail form, but she was happy to be with Lee and Lee himself was happy to be with her. When she died years afterwards, Lee honored her by training their children who thankfully were as healthy as he was to be ninja. Lee himself died in battle, but died with a smile, saving his children from a force of ninja trying to kill them. He personally carried Lee back to Konoha and buried him alongside his team as well as his wife, who had been welcomed by Neji and Tenten as well. Choji himself eventually found a wife, and the woman was a kunoichi by the name Suza from Suna as well, who proved that even those guys who were big-boned, as Choji preferred to call it, could get married. Suza was a very attractive woman but appeared to like Choji a great deal and was not the least bit bothered by his size, much to the surprise of Ino and Shikamaru. They had several children and she was welcomed warmly by Choji's parents when they finally met her. Even he was surprised at the good fortune that hit Choji, and not a day went by that he recalled laughing with Choji about it all. And it was therefore hard for Choji when Suza passed away after so many years together, but he manned up and became a good father to their children and then a grandfather to their grandchildren, and he was buried next to Suza when he too passed away, but not before doing the same ceremony for his family heiress, their firstborn daughter Chauna. Kiba and Akamaru eventually found their own mates, with Kiba actually getting along with the Kumo Kunoichi Karui, though how that ever happened, he could never understand, and Akamaru finally being able to find a mate in a female canine named Kuromaru. Akamaru had a number of pups, and Kiba as well as Karui had several children, with Karui being able to be in Konoha and Kumo. They too eventually were buried, with Kiba and Akamaru being the first, with Karui and Kuromaru joining them. He personally oversaw the funeral as well to make sure that his friends and their mates would be remembered for all they had done in and after the Fourth Shinobi War. Shino eventually had married as well with a member of the Hyuga branch family, a kunoichi named Aya, who was a distant cousin of Neji, who idolized her cousin and proved as capable as Neji and Hinata, though not as stern. It amazed everyone, even Neji and Hinata, that Shino would find a partner, but they congratulated him and he thanked them in his own way. They have 3 sons and 4 daughters, with the boys able to use the Byakugan and the girls being able to use the Aburame clan's special beetles without any problems. Shino and Aya were proud of their children, and they too had given their lives in the end to safeguard the future of their children in a battle that they took part in years into his reign as Hokage. Gaara himself met his end as he died serving Suna after passing the title of Kazekage to his own daughter with Matsuri. He and Gaara were always friends, and he was proud that Gaara rose to being the beloved Kazekage, and he privately thanked Matsuri for being there for Gaara. They both died in service to Suna, and befitting their time together, they were buried side by side, and he personally made a statue of him and Gaara shaking hands, a show of his eternal friendship with Gaara, and this was retained by Gaara's family and his own as a symbol of unity between Konoha and Suna. Then his wives finally reached their ends as well, with Sakura being the first to pass on after so many years of them being together. His former teammate was still beautiful even when she was as old as Tsunade when he first met the blonde Sanin, and he was happy that they had finally been able to be together and live as husband and wife after all that they had been through. They shared one last meal together and went to the training field they were in long ago. They spent the night there together talking about everything that happened to them. The most important was how they finally were able to fall in love with one another despite their history, and how she had been to him in the past, to which he replied that it was not a problem anymore and he would love her either way, much to her happiness. The next day, she passed on with a smile on her face as they sat there in the field, and he gave her a tearful farewell, and when she was buried, he placed a bouquet of Sakura blossoms on her grave to honor her and her namesake. Hinata soon followed 2 years after Sakura, and like Sakura, they spent time together before she passed away peacefully in her sleep. They traveled to the places they had been to in their youth, and to the places they had been to when they began to date after he had become Hokage. One such place was the very same waterfall when he had actually seen her before but had not recognized her. She blushed at the memories of it and how she felt when he found out. As soon as they got back to Konoha, the two of them spent one last night chatting with their children and grandchildren and how much faith they had for them. And they also spoke about how things turned out, with him still amazed at his discovery of her love for him when they were young and his apology for not being able to see it. She smiled and replied that he did not need to apologize to her. Hinata then passed away the very next day, and like Sakura, he made sure to place her favorite flowers on her grave. Amaru was the next to pass away from a sickness she suffered while serving as a field doctor for victims in a border conflict, but she carried on doing what she loved to do and served the people as best she could. He was proud of her even though it hurt him to know that she was soon going to pass away, as she had truly become someone he respected and loved for her devotion to saving lives without medical jutsu. She served Konoha by teaching medic nin how to still save lives should their chakra be too low for jutsu, and also taught him some of her own skills in medicine. They traveled to her home, and there she spent her last days healing and tending the sick there before going back to Konoha and teaching her graduating class of medic nin. Afterwards, they talked about how they met and how he had been a positive influence on her in the end. As she died of the sickness, he made sure that she was properly buried and placed her favored scalpel on her grave while keeping the medical sachet she made for him to use for himself or others. She and herself passed on after leaving behind the title of priestess long ago to her first daughter who succeeded her. She continued to use her power to help seal away evil spirits and demons should they return, with Naruto alongside her. Eventually her actions cost her as her powers drained her and she died, but not before she and him traveled to the same place where he had vowed to help her pass her powers to the next priestess. She also had helped in training him some new sealing jutsu that would use his chakra in conjunction with the sealing jutsu techniques he learned from the salvaged Uzumaki clan records that he was able to find after learning more of his mother's clan. She and him spent time together in that place, and she too was still beautiful even in old age as she passed away with a smile on her face. She gave him her pin and a good portion of her powers and soul in it, which was why he never left it behind. Koyuki herself met her end after many years of them being together. She worked hard to be Queen of Snow, Spring Country as well as wife to the Hokage of Konoha and a world-famous actress. It amazed him that she had so much stamina and energy as well, since in that span of time she also juggled being a mother to 6 active boys and 4 girls and also perfecting the generator that her father left under her care and becoming a beloved and respected ruler in the lands beyond her home. In time, however, the strain took its toll on her and she had to eventually retire from being an actress as time passed until she gave the throne to their firstborn son, and she spent time with him and even enjoying gardening with him. When she passed away, he made sure to play her movies both old and new and placing the same necklace she wore on her grave as his tribute to his favorite actress, princess, and wife. He also took the swords she had made for him as a present for their wedding and he treasured them and stored them in a scroll to be used in battle if needed. Mei herself eventually passed away many years after she gave up her position as Mizukage and gave it to their daughter, who was able to have her Kekkei Genkai as well as the Uzumaki clan's long life and vitality. She was still powerful and strong and their marriage helped ensure peaceful relations between their respective homes. Their relationship was dynamic in many ways, as Mei was not like most women he had met, though in time he grew to love the beautiful Kunoichi and she in turn loved him in her own fashion, and was happy to see that despite still being a Jinchuriki, he would never lose himself to sadness and despair. They fought side by side many times and their times together were very interesting. He personally assured her that she was never going to be forgotten and he made sure of that by having a statue of her and him in her home village to show the unity between them respective homes. On her grave he made sure to leave behind her favorite things as well as a carved statue of her face in her youth as well. The deaths of his friends and loved ones were hard on him, but he soldiered on to rule Konoha, but he soon passed the position of Hokage to Konohamaru and lived as an advisor to his former student, friend, rival. In time, however, he felt that his time was over and he had accomplished all that he had dreamed of ever since he was young. He felt that it would be better that he would others go on with their lives. There was still much his world had to offer and there was no sense that he could not go out and see what was beyond the elemental nations. His time with Temujin proved that the world was vast and seeing it all was an adventure in itself and he wanted an adventure. That was why he decided to leave Konoha and allow the younger generation to lead this time, and also he was going to see the world and the people he had helped protect from Madara and his mad plans of world conquest and control. That had not been easy to do, but the villagers agreed and so did the rest of the ninjas of Konoha as well as the younger generations of his clan. He gave his final words of advice to Konohamaru and also to the head of the clan, and after taking all he needed, he was on his way, but not before leaving behind a message that if Konoha ever needed his aid, then they can call on him to come and help them. His travels took him to many places and in them he met many different kinds of people. Some were good people, others were dangerous and not to be trusted, some were trying to survive and needed help. The time he spent was not just traveling and seeing the sights that were there to see, though. He decided to take the time to write his memoirs and also continue writing the novel series started by his godfather to honor him and earn money along the way. Even though he had quite the inheritance left behind by his parents and more, he wanted to earn everything by hard work and determination, and he did so, and that felt very good to him in more ways than one. It was not long before he was found by Konoha ninja once again. They greeted him and even bowed, but he never wanted that and told them that despite his status, he was still a human and wished to be treated as such. The Anbu nodded and apologized as they explained that in the years following his absence, his reputation grew to near saintly proportions and his family was doing well, which was why he was treated with such respect. He learned of a powerful device, a chakra weapon that had been stolen and was going to be used by a rogue force of ninja who wished to start a new ninja village with those who desired to return to the old ways and meant to attack Konoha itself to bring down the village. He did not wish that and he placed aside his wandering days to help his village once more. They tracked down the rogue forces and while he was able to convince some to surrender, the others did not. This forced him to fight and showing his abilities in combat once more, which had not dulled in the slightest even after years of travel around the world. However, the leader, a ninja named Karuta, defied him despite his own respect for Naruto and revealed that he had activated the weapon already and soon it would be unleashed on Konoha. The weapon was like a cannon shell and would instantly destroy Konoha in the same way Pain had done before as it left the base. He would never let that happen after all that he had accomplished and what so many had fought and died for. He intercepted the weapon with the same technique of his father and managed to use the same jutsu to move the weapon. But it detonated just as he used the jutsu. All he knew was that he had stopped it before it reached Konoha and all he saw was white, and he thought that he was finally going to die. He was not afraid as he had done everything, and even though the Kyuubi told him to escape, he did not, as he would be able to see his loved ones again. But instead, he did not die as soon as the light faded away. And now here he was, in a world that made no sense to him in any possible fashion. Naruto knew that staying here was not going to be a good thing, to say the very least. He had to find a good place to hide and gather more information about where he was at this time. Nothing was familiar to him and there seemed to be a lot of noises and sights, so he had to be careful. The first order of business he had to do was to find some way to blend it, and he doubted that his clothes that he usually wore were going to do him any good in this place that he now happened to be in at this time. With that in mind, he decided to get to using his jutsu. He turned and spotted a man who looked fairly well dressed and saw that he was able to blend in well enough. With that in mind, Naruto used that technique that he recalled very well. Henge. Once he was done, he went out to see what he could learn from this world that he was in. Thankfully it seemed that the henge was going to be able to do it and he was soon milling around in the crowds. The people were different than what he was used to, some of them dressed in fashions that he recognized, while the others were completely different as well. There were people who had different complexions and hair color as well as them speaking in a language that was unknown to the blonde shinobi. This prompted him to do what he could to find out just what sort of language they happened to be speaking in, but there was also a part of him that wished that there was someone who could speak his language. It was not long before he found himself going into an area of this city that seemed a lot different than the ones he had seen and a lot more familiar. At least familiar to a certain extent as he moved around, and the people looked familiar to him as well. It was here that his nose picked up a very familiar smell. Ramen. Yes. The blonde shinobi quickly honed in on the smell and sure enough, he was able to see the place of origin of the smell and saw that while it was not like the ramen stand he frequented all his life, it had a roomy and calm atmosphere. He opened the door to find that there were only a few customers there and the cook was a middle-aged but kind-looking woman. The cook turned and gave him a smile and spoke to him, but in the same language as everyone he met. Naruto frowned at that and decided to speak in his language. I can't understand what you are saying. The woman looked at him in surprise and then spoke in a different language, one that he quickly recognized. Oh my, a foreigner who speaks only Japanese. Huh, what do you mean by Japanese? Weeks later. The woman's name was Natsumi Oyama and she was the head chef of this ramen restaurant that her family owned for a number of years in the city that was known as Los Angeles. Her family had moved from their homeland of Japan years before as immigrants. Though Naruto had no idea why they would move away from this Japan place, he was not going to comment until he knew more. He had grown up enough to know that until he got all the needed information, making assumptions was asking for trouble. It took a while before Natsumi agreed to hire him as a worker in her place, though this required him to be in henge, though he was able to wear clothes that showed that he worked there. Some of the other workers were not too happy at him coming, but after a few weeks, he became a good friend to them. It made it easier that they spoke the same language, though they did comment on Naruto's dialect on more than one instance. He did give a cover story that his real parents had died while in Japan and he was raised by his adopted parents in a mountain village and only recently had he been able to go to this place in the US as it was called. He was here to try and find his birth relatives as well as rediscover his past identity, but had been so used to living in his mountain village that he was unsure about the customs of the US people. It was all a convenient lie of course, but Naruto knew that it had to be done, even if Konoha, the other hidden villages, or the elemental nations did not exist here, that did not mean he would speak it out. Besides, if Natsumi and the others found out that he came from a village of ninjas and all of his past deeds, they would have called him nuts. Natsumi was nice enough to help pay him and explained all that he needed to know about this place called the US, their currency, their customs, and more, though she pointed out that there was more to learn about the land than just from her. That was why she brought him some old books and magazines, and while he disliked reading too many things, the now mature ninja knew better than to scoff at information. He was able to use his Kage Bushin to even up the odds in reading time and soon learned quite a lot about this land, namely the language which he began to practice along with Natsumi and the others in the ramen restaurant. He also learned about these people who called themselves heroes. The most recognized as far as he had seen were these two, the one in the city of Metropolis named Superman and the other from the city of Gotham named Batman. He had to admit that it was strange to see these heroes. Superman was an incredible sight considering what he was able to do with all those powers of his, and the blonde shinobi had no doubt on his mind that if this Superman was in his world, he would have really gotten the attention of the ladies, a la Sasuke, and eventually him as well. Still, the man was rather nice, though the incident with this dark side character left a bad mark on him. But it seemed that he had spent a great deal of time clearing up his name, something that Naruto could respect as it mirrored his own efforts in his youth to be freed from the stigma of being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Batman was similar to a ninja, judging from his garb and the way he moved. Even if they were just images, Naruto had seen plenty of ninjas in action on his side and that of others to know how a ninja moved. Batman was certainly living up to the name, but Naruto was sure that there was more to this masked vigilante as he was called by the media. He could see from the face that this man suffered something tragic, possibly when he was young, to have made him become like this. It was reminding him badly of Sasuke, but unlike his former teammate and friend, he has not gone off and killed people for it. Naruto also had to admit that the gadgets he had with him were interesting and would have really been useful had they been in Konoha or any of the other villages. After a while, he had earned enough money and learned enough that he bid farewell to Natsumi and her family as well as her staff and decided to go out and find a place of his own to live in. He knew that he did not have a lot of money with him, so he would have to find another source of income at some point in time. Naruto managed to find it when he was able to compete in a lottery. The luck of the devil that Tsunade had told him that he had was more than enough to make him the lottery well enough and had allowed him to win a sizable amount of money, just enough for a number of months, and after a while he was able to find a place to stay. It was a load better than his old apartment and was more around the lines of the Hokage residence that he called home when he took office. And after getting the place while in his real form, he was able to get some peace, though he knew that he was going to have to find some means of income. Naruto had learned long ago as a kid how important it was to save and use his money well, so he was going to do the same here in this reality that he was in. And already he had an idea on how to put his non-ninja skills to the use of making sure that he had money of his own. A night later, Naruto looked over his apartment and was in his ninja garb, as he now began to call it. He wore his usual style of clothes and had his red coat on him with the kanji for fire shadow on it. He also wore a mask that was like that of a fox but had only the lower half of his face shown with his forehead protector there above it as well. The mask was specially made from ceramic and was chakra reinforced, so it would not be broken easily and could only be removed if he removed the invisible chakra strings that held it in place. He also happened to have his vest on, and he had his supplies to boot as well if he needed them. On his back were his swords, his supply pouch was on his back, and on his thighs were his kunai holsters, which were naturally loaded. This was going to be the first time that he was going to go into Los Angeles in disguise in his ninja garb as well. He had no doubt that this was going to be different from what he was used to, but he was all right with it, as this was something he was interested in doing ever since he got into the city. The apartment was not too far from the city and was not filled with people, so he doubted that anyone was there to see him, and it was at least 4 stories up without any other building nearby. He might not have any furniture of his own at the moment, but once he found a way to get his own money, that can be solved. With that in mind, he left behind a cage bushin to manage the place while he was gone and help make sure that anyone coming around would think that he was not going anywhere and was staying home. As he left the place, he was able to use another addition to his arsenal, which was kunai armed with specially made climbing cable reinforced with chakra. This way he could move about as if moving on ropes while using his abilities to walk on surfaces once he reached them. Any distance that he could reach with leaping he was able to tackle well enough while looking around the city while using his chakra to hold onto the surfaces. The blonde had to admit that a place like this was certainly different at night, but he had no doubt that it had its share of troubles. Even Konoha had its share of troubles under his watch, and he had no doubts in his mind that the same could be said for Los Angeles. The crimes that happened here might not be in the same way as those in his reality, but they came fairly close, and Naruto was sure that he was going to run into some of those said crimes soon enough. And he was right on the money, for at the very moment he was in the city, he spotted something, and what he saw was more than enough to get him angry and heading in that direction. In an alleyway. No, leave me alone. A pretty redhead was trying to keep away several thugs from getting closer to her. She was trying to keep herself calm at this moment, but she was terrified. Right had just left her place earlier in the afternoon to pick up some books from her friends, but they had gone to a nearby coffee shop for a drink and some time for themselves, and it was now late in the night that she was going home. Her senses were on alert as she moved through the way, but she was soon able to see the men following her. She was shocked by this and tried to lose them by running and getting home, but they were not going to let her get away. She had no other weapon with her, not even a can of mace or anything, so she ran, but sadly due to her panic she had made a wrong turn in the alleyways, and now here she was. One of the men grinned lecherously at the young woman and spoke in a very cocky tone. Now why would we do that, missy? We're just in the mood for some fun, plus some cash if you have any, that is. The young woman reached into her purse and took out the money from her wallet. It was her hard-earned money from her part-time job, and she was saving it all for a chance to find work, and it was hard to part with all of it. But no amount of money was worth her life as she tossed it to them while it was still in the money clip. Once it was there before the thugs, she prayed that they would leave her alone, though she doubted that. Here. That's all I have. Please take it and leave me alone. The leader of the punks took the money and counted it with a grin on his face, and the same could be said for the rest of his followers, but any hope the young redhead had of being left alone was dashed to pieces when they continued to close in on her. The leader took out a wicked knife and spoke to her once more. Not bad. You've gotten some nice dough on you. Now let's see if the rest of you is just as good. The redhead tried to get away, but her escape was cut off when one of the thugs intercepted her and pushed her back. She fell on the ground and tried to recover herself and managed to kick away the punk who tried to get to her. He groaned from the kick to his stomach, but he was not deterred by that. He and his buddies had her surrounded and there was no escape for her. They finally got some money and they were now going to have some fun. The lady was very good looking and had a nice figure to boot. No one was going to save her. Not like in Metropolis or Gotham, or anywhere else that had those costumed heroes. Los Angeles had none of their own, and that was good for them in every sense of the word. However, that idea was soon sent down the crapper as the punk was suddenly stopped dead in his tracks when something suddenly wrapped around him, and before he could ask what was that, he screamed when he was suddenly lifted into the air. The other punks and their intended victim were stunned by that as the group tried to look for their companion with the leader shouting out. What the fuck happened? Another punk shouted out, but this time in pain as he was clutching his legs, both of them, and he saw two large double-pointed needles in his thighs and his legs were bleeding, but he could not move as he felt himself becoming numb. He however managed to spot something nearby and pointed to the wall. His companions turned to look but saw nothing. They were able to turn back to their wounded companion and were about to ask what the hell he was pointing at, but they got their answer when they saw another figure behind their companion, who now dropped face first into the ground unconscious. They were now facing Naruto, who glared darkly at them. The woman was stunned at what she was seeing, and so were the punks, until the leader spoke out in a cocky but angry tone. "Who the fuck are you?" Naruto said nothing at first but then replied. "The name's not important right now. What I am going to do to lowlifes like you and your loser friends is what you should be concerned about." "Oh yeah, you some sort of nutjob in a costume who thinks he can be a hero. What are you going to do to us anyway?" Naruto glared even more and decided to end the taunting and replied. "You guys are so pathetic to actually be ganging up on a woman like this. Are you losers so disgusting that you can't even afford cheap dates?" That infuriated the group of punks, and the leader made that obvious as he struck first. "Shut up. I am going to mess you up right now, freak." "Bad move." Naruto was not impressed. This guy was moving too slow to be even a threat, as he casually dodged the strike from the guy's knife and he avoided the rest, without moving at all from his current position. He then lashed out with a powerful kick that sent the man flying back and hitting the ground hard and skidding away until he collided with a trash can. The other punks were stunned by that, and that was the opening that the blonde shinobi was waiting for as he quickly charged in. The punks only saw a brief flash of his yellow hair as he unleashed a world of pain on them. The punk nearest him was introduced to the blonde's elbow strike to the stomach that sent him crashing down hard in pain, as Naruto used his back as springboard to land two kicks into the face of two other punks that sent them flying back. One of the punks managed to recover from the shock and tried to blindside the blonde, but got nowhere as Naruto was quickly able to dodge his attacks and appear behind him and land a punch the second he turned that sent him down. The blonde evaded another punk armed with a chain, but he caught it and used his strength to yank the guy forward and used his arm in the same way as Karabian did, though he used no chakra or element in that attack as the punk was too weak to use it on to begin with. The man was sent to the ground hard as Naruto quickly flipped forward and introduced his feet to the chin of the next one as he used his hands to lift himself up like a rocket from the ground. He then lashed out with a spinning kick in mid-air to send another punk flying as he struck him right at the head. As he landed, he spun around to avoid the next one, who was armed with a broken bottle intent on stabbing him in the back. The fool moved past Naruto and the blonde introduced him to the ground with a sweep kick followed by an elbow strike to the back of the head. He then turned and introduced a series of finger strikes on the next attacker, hitting in spots he knew would work to stop the man cold, and used full-blown fists on the next attacker while the first was frozen stiff. The blonde then used his knees to strike at the second attacker and finished off the two of them with powerful kicks that sent them going off to La La Land. The former Konoha Hokage and Shinobi looked to see that the punks who attacked him were all out cold. They were all unaware that he had not used his full strength on them, as doing so would have either crippled them or killed them outright, and he was not in the mood for that since they were not true threats. But a shout of fear got his attention and he turned to see that the leader had somehow managed to get hold of the young woman and had his knife by the throat. By now, however, the man was in a panic and tried to find a way out of this mess. "You let me leave right now, or else the bitch gets her throat cut." Naruto glared darkly at the armed man who held the woman by the throat with a knife and spoke in the coldest tone he could muster. "Harm even an inch of her, and your life ends here and now." The thug saw something in the masked man's eyes that told him that this was no idle threat, and that shocked him as he began to feel a great deal of fear in himself. With that fear growing by the second, he finally relented and dropped the knife that he had on the young woman's throat. "All right, man. She's all right. See. Are we cool?" Naruto said nothing, but he reacted as he charged at only a quarter of his already impressive speed, and that was enough as he quickly grabbed the punk and tossed him over the woman he had held hostage and smashed him to the ground while disarming him of the knife. The shock of it was more obvious to the young woman, but Naruto expected that and calmly relaxed himself as he searched the lead punk and found the young woman's money. He took that and offered it to her while speaking in his most calm and friendly tone. "Here you are, miss. I believe this is yours." The young woman looked at Naruto, and as soon as she realized that he was not going to harm her, she reached out and took her money. She felt instant relief as she realized she had just been saved from not just being robbed, but far worse as well. She broke into tears and nearly collapsed, but Naruto quickly saved her and spoke to her. "Are you all right? I just realized you saved me not from just being robbed, but, oh my god, what they could have done before you came along." Naruto said nothing as he allowed the woman to cry so she would get the emotions out. He glared darkly at the punks and wished he could have really given them a serious beating, but he was not going to do that before a woman who was by rights a civilian. As soon as he felt that she was all right, he turned to her and spoke once more as she wiped away her tears. "You feeling better?" "Why yeah, thanks again. I'll call the cops and tell them everything that happened here. Thanks for saving me." Anytime, miss. Oh, sorry about that. My name is Eleanor. Eleanor Riley. Most of my friends call me Ellie for short. Ellie. Nice name. Fits such a pretty lady. Ellie smiled a bit and had to admit that her rescuer felt nice. She watched him move away and to her amazement began to walk up the walls as if it was nothing to him at all. She had heard about some heroes being able to do that, but she had never seen it done before in front of her. She then realized that she had not gotten his name. Wait, who are you? Naruto turned to face her and after a moment or two of thinking, he replied. You can call me Fire Shadow, or in another language, Hokage. With that, Naruto moved up the wall and soon disappeared, and that was enough for Ellie to call the police. He had a lot to tell her parents and friends about what had just happened to her. As for Naruto, he had not gotten too far when he felt his danger senses kick in and he moved quickly. On the road. The gun battle that was raging in the streets was getting fiercer by the second as Naruto finally arrived at the sounds that were in the area. He looked to see a number of cars in black and white with flashing blue and red lights. His reading of Natsumi's materials told him that these were cars owned by the police, a sort of government-sponsored civilian peacekeeping force and not part of the military. He saw that their situation was not too good and while he would have just let them handle it, the sight of several wounded police officers and civilians brought back images of the battles he had been in. The battle with Pain, Nagato and the aftermath of the Fourth Shinobi War came back to him and that was enough to make him move fast. The robbers were armed with high-caliber weapons and the police were still not able to do much until SWAT arrived as their weapons were not doing well since the robbers had high-grade body armor on them. Things looked very grim as several of their comrades and some of the civilians nearby were wounded and paramedics were there but with the bullets flying about they couldn't move to help the wounded. This was how bad it was and the police had a hell of a time trying to keep the media from getting hit as well. They were about to get some help as some of the robbers who were reaching for their clips suddenly were unaware of a strange knife-shaped object land in their group. They were not going to be unaware for long as someone suddenly attacked them from behind. A few of them were sent fleeing backwards and the others turned to see a strangely dressed guy appear in their midst and apparently armed with a pair of short knives. They turned to try and deal with him but they were in for the shock of their lives as the man moved too fast for them to get a good lock on him. Naruto was not going to let them get a chance as their weapons reminded him of the kunai-spewing weapons of the Sky Ninja that attacked his village a long time ago, though these were a lot more dangerous than those were. Several of the robbers were badly injured as Naruto quickly used his wind chakra to amplify the cutting force of his weapons and also he used his strength to a slightly higher degree to hit his targets. The kunai's amplified cutting force allowed Naruto to cut through their weapons and body armor easily, wounding them but not killing them outright as he wanted to let the police handle that as this was still their job, but if he could keep these robbers from harming more people then all the better. He then placed aside his kunai and switched to his swords and with the training he got from his old friend Karabi he was doing a very good number on his foes right now. Already the results of the blonde's rescue were obvious as the paramedics were able to get to the wounded and treat them while the more critical ones were evacuated when SWAT arrived. The police were not shooting as they were not willing to risk hitting the one who had just came in to help them. And the media themselves were now trying to record what was going on before them as the new person was helping the police. Naruto himself noted that and decided to end it quickly as he cut through the weapons of his attackers and used his taijutsu to even up the odds in the battle. He placed aside one of his swords and took his special kunai and placed it back as the last of the robbers fell down to the ground, his shotgun cut in half and him out cold. The scene might have seemed peaceful had it not been for the now incoming armored truck that was being driven by one of the robbers. Apparently he and his posse had planned to use the armored truck as an escape method once they were able to take it from the bank's garage as this bank happened to have one in said garage. He was about to meet up with the other when he spotted from the TV what was going on. And now he apparently wanted to run down the one who had made him and his crew miss out on what would have been a very sweet score that would have been the start of a career as they would use the money to pay for more powerful weapons and equipment to rob even more banks not just in LA but elsewhere as well in the US, with the exception of the cities that had those cape-wearing heroes in them. And now it was ruined by this new guy and he planned to reduce the blonde into a pile of bloody, messed up to hell roadkill. Not that Naruto was going to let that happen as he placed aside his sword. Naruto glared at the truck driver as he readied his technique to stop the last thief dead in his tracks. He summoned his chakra and soon formed a sphere of pure energy, which surprised just about everyone in the area. He then slammed the Rasengan right into the front of the vehicle and focused his chakra into his feet to hold him into place. Rasengan. The result was explosive as the Rasengan slammed hard into the vehicle's armored front, and with Naruto's much stronger chakra reserves behind it and his refined control abilities now at the forefront, it was going to be explosive indeed. The truck stopped with a roar of metal as it was lifted off its feet briefly before the metal buckled hard and began to warp and crack on impact. The vehicle hit the ground as its engine was completely mangled by the impact force alone. The driver was not thrown out of the vehicle due to wearing his seat belt, but the results were just as surprising for him as he gasped in horror from the impact force and from the landing as his vehicle hit the ground with the armored skin in the front cracked and bent. He didn't have time to react as Naruto moved to the driver's side and used his wind chakra to cut through the door and toss it aside, and he cut him loose from the seat belt and to the ground to the police. The police and the media looked on in shock as the battle was over, and the blonde shinobi turned and gave them a smile and bowed. He flicked his hand up to a building, and all they saw afterwards was a flash of yellow as the man disappeared. They looked around but found no trace of him, and thus they began to try and piece together what had just happened right in front of them. As for Naruto, he was already a block or two away from the whole scene as he held his father's Hiroshin kunai in hand. He had learned about it from Kakashi years ago, and after years of hard work and due diligence which Sakura herself had told him he should have when they were kids, he was able to succeed and make his own. It was hard work, but it was worth it, and his old man would have been proud of him as well. He sighed and had a feeling that sooner or later, he was going to be in for the long haul. No doubt the very second the Kyuubi and him talked about it, that demonic fox was going to ride his case, as Natsumi put it once. He moved away from the scene and headed home, just as the night was soon going to be drenched in rain. In the Daily Planet the next day. As the day went on in the Daily Planet, several of the reporters were currently listening into the news, namely that from the City of Angels. The video was from last night and had only one topic in mind. A violent shootout between a number of bank robbers and the LAPD was brought to a swift resolution last night when an unknown figure appeared and fought with the bank robbers. The figure was dressed in black and orange and wore what appeared to be a short-sleeved long coat of red with black flames with some sort of Japanese writing on it, which our analysts have translated to mean fire shadow, or in this case, Hokage. The images showed Naruto's battles with the thugs and how he had stopped the truck bearing down on him, much to the interest of the reporters, some of whom included Jimmy Olsen, Angela Chen, and the recently arriving Lois Lane and one Clark Kent. They were all watching as the blonde Hokage's Rasengan smashed the front of the truck hard, and they also watched as he yanked away the door and had the driver down as he joined his already unconscious friends. He then used some sort of energy sphere to stop the vehicle cold and soon faded away before he would be interviewed. So far all attempts to locate this Hokage, as he is no doubt becoming known as, have not succeeded. Though in another story a young woman named Eleanor Riley had met the Hokage, as she had apparently been saved by the Hokage from a band of thugs who had tried to rob her as well as violate her. He arrived and beat them before things could have escalated, and Miss Riley had only good things to say about the Hokage after he had saved her. As the interview of Riley came to a close as the punks were being arrested by the police, the reporter then spoke. In this reporter's humble opinion, this is a blessing thus far. For years the city of Los Angeles has no superhero or heroine to its people in the same way as Metropolis is Superman, or as Gotham has Batman. Only time will tell how this new addition to the City of Angels would fare. But for today from TV8 News, this is Dana Carmichael bidding you a good day, and to you Hokage, a warm welcome to the City of Angels. Lois smiled a bit and turned to Clark and spoke. Looks like Superman and Batman are not going to be alone. What do you think of this new kid on the block, Smallville? I am not sure yet, Lois, but he's certainly a skilled fighter. Jimmy nodded and replied. Yeah, and he looks rather young, many late teens or early 20s, kind of like Supergirl, I guess. Still, it is kind of good to know that we have a new hero to the ranks. Clark nodded, though he still looked at the image. Who are you? Clark had a feeling that he was not the only one who was asking that very same question as well. No doubt Bruce and the others of his family would be curious as well who this new face was, and no doubt Bruce would be very critical of this new youngster. And Clark had a feeling that he was going to run into this Hokage at some point in time. He was not sure when, but if there was one thing he knew that he could count on, is that his gut feeling was right on the money. The world of heroes has just gotten bigger. In Los Angeles, the busy streets of the place known to all as the City of Angels was so different from what one who was not a native was used to. And that applied to the disguised blonde who was currently walking the streets in a set of clothes that were the kind one associated with a regular teenager to an early adult who had his own sense of clothing style. Naruto wore a set of black denim pants, a white shirt and a green with black vest on. The only thing that would have been different about his appearance was his ever-present birthmarks on his face, as well as his now red hair, which was still spiky but draped downwards. The blonde had managed to get his hands on washable red hair dye and used that to color his hair. Naruto made sure to pick a color that would match his mother Kushina Uzumaki's own deep red hair, so it would be different. He had done so in order to avoid being seen in public, since if he had not done it and left his hair in not only the natural shade and style, it would have attracted attention. He doubted that they would have recognized him as the Hokage from last night, but if there was one thing Naruto learned in his long life and career as a shinobi, there was always a need to be ready for anything. Besides, it gave him a chance to actually try and have the very same cool red hair of his mother. He recalled easily how he had loved his mother's hair when he had been able to speak to her for the first and last time in his mind during his attempt to finally control the chakra of the Kyuubi long ago. Kushina smiled and loved that, as well as loving him deeply, and that had been the key to him winning the fight, and she laughed at his words on how cool he would have looked with her hair color on instead of his father's. Now he looked the part, and that made him smile even more. and so far it seemed to be working as he moved through the city well enough without having to resort to henge. Still, it amazed him to see the city of Los Angeles. It looked so different in the day compared to what he had in the night when he went out only yesterday. And this was the reason why he took the time to disguise himself and explore. He could have used henge once again to try and move about like last time, but he decided against it since there were now alternatives that he could use, and thus he did not need to use his chakra. That was going to be used for other purposes, and as such more practical disguises were a must for something like this. In an internet cafe. Wow. This is different. Those were the words came from his mouth that easily described this place he was in right now. He had seen the very large number of people there in the building and wondered what was this all about. He had managed to reach the inner areas of the city and had seen a large number of people there, and him being the curious one that he was, decided to take a look and see what was going on. And the things he saw in there were impressive to say the very least, as he saw computers and more all over the place. It was not that Naruto had no idea about technology, far from it, as he was very familiar with a number of things here in this world. TV, refrigerators, radios, and even a few other devices such as water heaters, watches, toasters, and a few other things were just as common there in Konoha as it was here, and the other villages as well. But he had to admit that some of the things he had seen thus far were utterly new to him. These things called computers, video cameras, cell phones, iPads, MP4 players, printers, scanners, all of these were so unknown to him, and even though he had seen a number of these already, the cars, motorbikes, airplanes, buses, and more were utterly alien to him. None if these were seen as common to him in his mind back in Konoha. Even this internet was amazing. It was like all the world's news and more were made into one very accessible source and location. And so far he could see that the technology in this world he was in was more than enough to make the technology back in Konoha, or at least some of it, look old and obsolete. As he continued to work on the computer that he had paid for with some of the money he had on himself, he began to explore the internet and the computer to find out what he could. The first thing he did was search if there was anything related to the layout of the city he was in. The night before, he had managed to explore most if not all of the city of Los Angeles, but he needed a map, and that way he would know just where to go and what to do. He turned to one of the staff and asked a few questions. "Excuse me." "Yes, sir. How do you take this map from here and place it on paper?" The young attendant looked at Naruto with some level of confusion, as he thought that everyone already knew how to use computers, unaware that the redhead before him had no experience whatsoever with computer systems. After some time, the map was made for Naruto, and he in turn was given a short idea on how the internet could be used for anything. One such thing was something he knew that his godfather, the pervy sage Jiraiya, would have enjoyed immensely when he checked it out. Even he was impressed by what he was looking at as well and couldn't help himself as he smirked somewhat. Man, I can bet the pervy sage would have loved this. Who knows what sort of ideas he would have gotten. As he placed that thought aside, he decided to see what else he could learn, but he knew that he was going to have to be rather careful about it. Using Kage Bunshin to learn stuff was one thing, but doing that in a place where such techniques could arouse trouble and too much scrutiny. And that was something that went against his training. It was possible to use Kage Bunshin and use henge on them, but that would be taking a good amount of chakra. And while his control was a load better than what it was before when he was younger, way younger that is, he was not too sure about the idea of unleashing 1,000 Kage Bunshin and then using henge, since henge still required him to see a person and make an exact copy of said person. And naturally making a number of copies of other people was bound to get attention. This was why he was keeping his reading to himself, and while it was already beginning to stress him out a bit, he was not going to complain. Later. It took quite a while for him to get his work done, but at least he now had a map of the whole city and would not have to waste too much time moving about. But that did not mean that he was going to have an easy time of the whole thing as he went about to get his bearings. Having a map of the city with a bird's eye view is one thing, being on the ground and looking for said location was something else as well. But he was not going to make too much of a fuss. He naturally marked the places where he could find food shops and restaurants if he needed to grab a quick bite. He looked around to make sure that he was not going to stand out like a sore thumb, and he was happy that his disguise was working fine so far. He then decided to go and see any other sights that he might have missed. He also made sure to keep his eyes and ears open in case of trouble. He had some supplies hidden on him in sealing scrolls which he could open and use. This included special containers filled with water so he could wash away the red hair color. The next were his ninja clothes, and naturally his weapons and equipment. Most people would have been shocked by the fact that he was a ninja and he was wearing those kinds of clothes and in broad daylight, but considering where he came from, ninjas doing morning missions was not unheard of, and he had done a fairly large amount of those missions. He also decided to read up on what was the view of ninjas in this world, and what he learned was not exactly something that he had expected. When he discovered that they were not able to use chakra like he could not help but be surprised by that discovery. The way they used the ninjutsu that he was familiar with was both familiar yet odd as well, and the gear that they were known or suspected of using was both familiar and yet not at the very same time. Naruto also had to admit that some of the documentaries made about ninjas were partially right and also those films were somewhat close. Still, he had yet to meet ninjas in the flesh, though Batman was the closest one to that description, as the man was no doubt trained well. So far this world's technology and what he had seen was something that he was still getting used to. But at the very least there were no shortages of things to do, places to see, and women to look at every now and then. So far however there was nothing going on that would force him to go into his ninja uniform, and for that he was thankful. Hours later. Man, what a day. Naruto silently said to himself as he entered what was a small diner. The smell of food that was unlike anything he had tried before was new and tempting to him. He had enough of his previous winnings to get himself a meal, which was something that was called scrambled eggs with bacon, and toasted sourdough bread. The waitress smiled at him in a rather perky and friendly manner. Is there anything else you want, mister? Naruto looked at the rather nice-looking woman and noted that she would have to be in her late teens and seemed to be in a rather happy mood, no doubt hoping to finally take a day off from work now that the night was coming in. He smiled gently at her and replied in a respectful manner, as he had matured well enough to know when to give respect to others. I am all right, though I would like some juice if you have any. Sure thing, we've got grape, apple, lemonade, lime, strawberry, and watermelon right now. Which would you want? Naruto thought it over and replied after a moment or two. I'll take the watermelon. Sure thing there, give it a few minutes, okay. The disguised blonde nodded as he went back to trying some of the food, and found that the food was not bad to him at all. It was actually rather nice and totally unlike any of the food that he was used to eating back in Konoha, though he had recalled trying something similar back in his traveling days. The sourdough bread was a new thing for him though, and he was eager to dig into the bread even more. The waitress came back with his drink and Naruto found the drink to be rather nice. However, his danger senses kicked in just as another man wearing a jacket came into the place. Naruto kept his cool while keeping the man in his sights, trying to discern what the reason was that his senses were telling him to keep an eye on the guy. It was not long before he noted the way the man seemed to sometimes move his hands into his pockets, like he was either checking something or making sure to have his hand on said item. The guy also seemed to be looking around in a way that told the ninja that he had less than friendly intentions. Naruto's feelings were right on the money when the man moved towards one of the waitresses, and before anyone else would notice with the exception of him, the man took out a knife and grabbed the waitress. The scream of the waitress was enough to get everyone's attention as people screamed as the man now pressed the knife into the throat of the woman he now held hostage. All right, shut the hell up. The owner of the diner moved out and saw what was happening. Naruto sensed that he had tried to reach for a weapon but stopped when he saw that the man had a hostage. But he tried to speak and reason with the man. Hey buddy, take it easy here. Screw you, old man. I want everything you have in that cashier of yours, right the hell now. The man then looked at the people including Naruto and spoke seriously. And if any of you try calling the pigs here, then I got this woman right now and take one of you and do the same. You got me. The frightened people nodded and so did Naruto, but he was hardly afraid. Compared the numerous foes he had fought back in his world, this guy was barely at any level. Heck, even an academy student would have been a lot more dangerous than him. But he did have a hostage, so no one could make a move, even though the former Hokage could tell that a few of the patrons were eager to try and stop him. Naruto knew he could easily take this guy, but using his ninja training was out of the question since it would attract attention. He had to let others do the move, and to do that, he needed to give them an opening. And he already had a very good idea on how to do just that as he reached into his pockets slowly and took out a coin. The blonde did it quietly as the man began to herd some of the more terrified people away to the door, no doubt to block it with their own bodies just in case someone came in. He in the meantime was still shouting expletives towards the owner to hurry up and give him cash. Naruto noted that the ones who he had seen were ready to make a move were looking intently at the man and not at him. Good, now we make the opening, hope to Kami this works. Naruto was carefully moving out of the way as he studied the one who was trying to rob the diner he was in. He knew that he needed to get into an angle and that would then allow him to attack. Thankfully his ninja training had paid off as he had made sure to improve himself during those years back in Konoha, and he was soon able to get to the angle that he needed. The guy had his hostage and was focused on the waitress and the others but had not noticed the disguised blonde as Naruto got a small coin and waited a bit more until the man turned. He focused some of his chakra into the coin, and once he was sure that he had coated the coin well enough with his chakra, he made a quick and sharp toss and sent the coin right at the man's arm, namely at a nerve area that would cause not only pain but if hit hard enough force the man to drop his weapon, and hopefully that would allow him or the other patrons to try and take down the man without risk to themselves in the very same moment. The chakra made the coin heavier and thicker, but not enough to cut through the skin, but naturally would impart enough force to hit the nerve that Naruto was aiming for. The attack from the blonde was more than enough as the man shouted out loudly as a sharp pain snaked through his arm. G. The attack made the man drop the knife he held, and that was the moment some of the other patrons needed, as one of the larger ones got up and attacked with a football-style tackle that sent the man to the ground. The pain of both attackers and the surprise of it all was enough to make the man loosen his grip on the waitress as another man came in to help the one who tackled the robber by kicking the knife away. The owner came in and brandished a handgun and forced the man to stop struggling at the sight of the firearm. Call 911. Later. Man, that was a heck of a first night. Naruto arrived at his apartment and took off his mask, coat, and vest once he was in the room. He made his way to the living room and placed his swords on the small table that he had with him in the room and sat down on the nearby chair. He groaned a bit and felt his body begin to relax after a very long night on patrol, as it were. After the episode with the hostage-taking thief at the diner, Naruto was able to evade the cops and disappear, something that was good at now and had a lot of experience doing since a vast portion of the people were still in shock and dealing with the thief. He also made sure to blend into the shadows that were there before quickly washing away his hair color, placing his hair back to the way it usually was, and then getting dressed. Once that was done, he was now moving about the city and had to deal with a few other problems as well. There had been some muggings that he broke up, some thieves trying to steal jewelry and other things of value, a few carjacking attempts, a few drug trafficking attempts, and a few serious street fights. None of them were in the same league as the things he had dealt with in his younger days, but they happened quite a lot. That was something he had to accept, since Los Angeles was a very large city compared to Konoha and the other cities he had seen in his travels, and the police were no doubt working very hard to keep the peace in the city. That was why he did not interfere in some of their actions unless there was a situation where the police were either unable to help in time due to distance or were outnumbered and unable to handle the situation. He had to give them credit for taking such risks in their professions, as he had read about them in the internet on his travels in the city, and while there were those among them who used their position and authority for their own ends, the rest were good men and women. Naruto got up and headed to the refrigerator and took out some ramen, and after taking the time heat them, he also decided to grab some fruit and a good drink of cool and still very much fresh milk as well, some of the things he had managed to get before his outing, finding a supermart a fair distance from his new place once he settled in. As he ate his food, he began to think about the other aspects of his time in this world. His time as Hokage had helped him see that he was still in a very unique situation. One concern was the fact that he was indeed an unknown person in this world he was in. There was no doubt in his mind that none of the things he knew were going to be found here, so he should not bother in trying to find them. This world would no doubt begin to question who he was, and sooner or later, there were going to be people who would try to find out more about him. Back in Konoha before he became Hokage, he knew that he had the registered paperwork as a citizen and ninja of Konoha as well as a member of the ninja army of the Land of Fire. And when he became Hokage, he had dealt with a few instances where he had to fill in citizenship registration papers for a number of reasons, namely when his children were born. Here, he had none of that. He did not have medical records, no birth certificate, no nothing. And if there was one thing he learned well, it was the lack of these things that instantly sent warning signals to people in government. He should know, since when he had looked through the files after the war, he found out about Kabuto's own files when he was taken in by a Konoha medic nin when he was found in a battlefield so long ago. That was why he had little problem entering Konoha in the past, since he had already files on hand to show that he was a citizen of Konoha through adoption. He needed to address this soon, as his second concern was involving his own living space. Not many people wanted to live here, and thus, there was a chance that someone was going to be rather curious why he would willingly live there. Staying in the apartment might give him a place to rest, recover, and whatnot, but without any records it was going to look very odd. This meant that sooner or later, he would have to find himself a place to live that would be off the grid but still keep him close to the city if he needed to be. Another concern was money. He had thought of it before, but he had a lot of things on his mind at the time. Winning a lottery was one thing due to his rather potent luck that Tsunade and even his wives had said was like the luck of the kami, but this was a completely different matter entirely. Winning a large amount of money was no doubt going to get attention from people, and there was no telling if they were people that did not have bad intentions. In Konoha, his winning of the lottery was not too much of a concern. Here it might be. He, however, still needed money in order to buy the things he needed, and as such, he needed to have a source of income. Hiring himself out as a ninja was a viable option, but he was not sure if it was a good option. There were no doubt other people who hired themselves out for legitimate and less than legitimate work and get paid for it. These people no doubt would have no desire for heavy competition, and there was no doubt that they would try and deal with him. And while he could be an assassin, he had not killed anyone just for money alone. When he finally killed both Kabuto and Madara, he had been paid handsomely, but these men were totally irredeemable and had to be taken out as soon as possible, and money was the last thing on his mind. He had a huge amount of Ryo, but he knew that the currency in his world was not going to be acceptable, so he needed money that was native to this world. He thought it over more and more, and it was not long before he hatched up a solution, and just as he was about to do it, he got a call from none other than his former resident, the Kyubi. "What the heck is cooking up in that mind of yours again, brat?" It's been a while, Furball. How have you been? Naruto heard the Kyuubi growl darkly at that, and the demon fox who had been his resident for years respond to that. If it wasn't for the facts that I can't kill you since you and I are still tied to live together, I am no longer as powerful as I once was, and the fact that I finally developed a real respect for you, I would eat you alive and piss on your remains after I take over your body. But you're not going to do either, right? Don't get snide with me, brat. You and I might be on much better terms than when you were still a shrimp and when you finally grew up, but we are hardly going to be full-time friends. You and I are allies of convenience and nothing more. Naruto snickered at that, as he knew that to some degree, the Kyuubi was right. Even after their time together, his control over the Kyuubi's chakra, and to the Kyuubi's grudging respect, the defeat of Madara and his allies as well as Sasuke, they were hardly good friends. He had taken the Kyuubi's hatred in the past and eventually they became respectful to one another, but they were not like Kurabi and his own Biju. He still kept the Kyuubi sealed away, and he knew that if given even a sliver of chance, the Kyuubi would try to take over his body and use it for its own needs. Maybe we are, but you have to admit that we did a lot better working side by side than going after each other by the throat. I did help you gain your desire for revenge against Madara for the crap he pulled on you after all. Grr, fine, and at least you are no longer a weak container like before. I swear, every time I think about how you used to be, it makes my stomach groan and my teeth ache. And at least I finally got to see you get laid and married to worthy mates. Shame they're gone, but at least those were good times. Naruto frowned at that and replied. Have you been peering into my memories again? It's a habit since there's nothing to do while you are in control, and besides, I only get to go out when there is a need for it, so what is on your mind anyway? You've been making a racket for a while now and I am getting annoyed by it. Just thinking about what we need to do. Just the regular boring stuff again. You know, I hate to say this, but I long for the good old days. Oh, you mean the days when we were dodging away for our lives, fighting Akatsuki and Madara, as well as what was left of his plans, and also the deceased Jinchuriki that Manika of a nut brought back to life, as well as that army of cloned creeps named Zetsu. If I were to recall, you were always telling me not to be so reckless with our lives. Since when do you want those days back all of a sudden? At least those old days were not boring, brat. All we've been doing so far is foiling robberies and the like. Pure crap assignments if you want to hear me comment about it. Though at least this world we're in has promise and I'm not going to be dealing with those blasted Uchiha again. So what is going on right now in this place you call your brain? Tell me now so I can get some blasted sleep already. Naruto told the Kyuubi, and after a while, the Kyuubi replied. So that's the reason you've been making such a mental racket. Please, you've done worse before. Living on the move in this city should be enough. Stay in one place and then move around, and doing odd jobs here and there should cover it. Easy for you to say. You don't have a lot to deal with in your own mind, and stop peering into my memories, Kyuubi, or else I am going to tighten that cage again. Ha, at least you've grown a very good pair. Tell you what, why don't we go and get drunk and have a lot of fun? From what I have seen, this city's got some interesting stuff to look at and experience, especially the female company. Oh sure. Go out and get drunk and get laid. That seems to be an answer you would come up. I swear you're like the pervy sage at times. It's a start, and besides, with my healing of you, your bloodline, and that senjutsu you've been working with for decades, you're going to be fine. Haha. We have to worry about how we're going to live here, Kyuubi. That stuff can wait. I was thinking of being a sort of traveling writer, might work. And what, pray tell, are you going to be writing about? My travels, people, places I've seen, battles I've fought in, that sort of thing. I might even try my hand at doing those novels the pervy sage cooked up here in this world, like what I did back in the old one. HMPH. Do what you like, brat, but I sure as hell hope we get to see some action soon. I am getting really annoyed that we only have to deal with such small fry. If there is nothing else, I am going back to bloody sleep. Night then, Furball. Same to you, shrimp. As soon as that conversation was over, Naruto began to think about that idea. Writing was something he had done a lot of times and he had plenty to write about. He could try it out and at least see if he could earn money out of it. But he still needed some things to do that. He usually relied only on an empty book and his supply of pens and his imagination, but this world had a number of very interesting things that he felt he could use to his advantage. It was going to be something that he was going to have to take in consideration, but for now, a good night's sleep could do him a world of good. After cleaning up the place and making sure to secure his home from anyone who might come in, he got some much needed shut-eye. Tomorrow he was going to do some major shopping and also possibly win some more money in either a few odd jobs or in a lottery, and when that happens, he was going to get to work. 4 weeks later. Jimmy Olsen was usually the kind of guy who was working around the clock in the Daily Planet, namely when it came to pictures and articles that were of great interest, since he wanted to be a photographer and one of the best in the Daily Planet as well. But right now, he was checking out this recently circulated short novel that was becoming something of a hit with some of the younger members of the newspaper. The young man had to admit as he read the story that it was interesting, and more than once he could not help but shake his head as well as blush. Man, whoever came up with this is either a guy with a very vibrant imagination, or one hell of a pervert. He was so engrossed in reading the book that he was not aware that there were two people coming in behind him. Thus it was not surprising that he was surprised when the book was taken from him. Hey. You know better than to be reading on the job, Jimmy. The young man gulped as he recognized the voice as Lois Lane's, and sure enough, he was right as he saw that it was indeed Lois Lane with Clark nearby as well. Sorry about that, I'm just reading the story halfway now. Lois read some of the book's contents and she raised an eyebrow at this and looked at Jimmy. Where exactly did you get this? I bought it in a bookstore. It was recently released from Los Angeles, and made by a writer there, someone calling himself Sage Thompson or something like that. For a guy who writes stories like that, he's not too bad, though not as good as you, Lois. The dark-haired female reporter shook her head and replied. This guy's different, I'll give him that, but while he might stir a man's ego with some of this, I still don't have a liking for what I have read so far, though he does have a rather extensive imagination. You mind if I take a look at this book, Lois? Lois raised an eyebrow at that and replied. You sure about that idea of reading this book yourself, Smallville? The stuff I just read might not be good to you. Clark smiled a bit and replied. I'll be fine, Lois, I am a full-grown man after all. Clark looked the book over as soon as Lois handed him the book, and when he read some of it, he could not help but raise his own eyebrows. The two waited until he replied, though he could not help but have a slight shaking of the head as he spoke. He's got a vivid imagination, all right. Still, it's not too bad, at least, compared to some of the things I have heard about. Right, anyway, we've got a story to cover. Make sure Perry does not see you with this, Jimmy. As the two left, Jimmy took the book and hid it away, and he wondered just who this guy was. He was not very famous and was not that recognized, but the fact that he had this story made and published meant that he had some clout, no matter how small. He then got back to reading and couldn't help but get back into the swing of things. If he ever met this guy, he was going to ask just where all this came from, since despite coming close to being called porn, it had a good story. Unknown to him. Naruto yawned a bit as he headed off the roof of the train he was riding on and was soon in the trees. As soon as he was in the clear, he continued the rest of the trip in his own fashion. His new destination was still a day or so away, but he was going ahead to make sure that he had plenty of time to spare. This place in question was interesting to him, and exploring the outside world was going to be interesting to him. Apart from wearing a new set of clothes, he now had a backpack carrying a laptop, several portable and rechargeable batteries, a wireless internet drive connection device, and a few devices called USBs. These had his files, and after spending a week pouring through computer manuals and practice, he was able to make good use of it. He had won enough money to buy what he felt was a good and durable laptop, and went to get the rest of the devices he now had, and worked on a short story that had him in it, though with a different name, along with his late wife Hinata, who had a different name as well. It was actually based on a mission they did together when they were not yet married and what they did afterwards. He grinned to himself as he recalled how surprised he was when he discovered the wild side of the normally gentle and kind-hearted Hyuga heiress. Hinata was not too wild, but still, it had very interesting results either way. That was his first story, and thankfully it was enough to get him paid a good amount, though the books were limited, as he had found a publisher who was willing to take the challenge and accepted the fact that he was a traveling writer. They agreed that he would send them stories via the net when on the move or when he was there in the area, and while it was odd to be sure, he was happy that the man agreed to it anyway. For now he was on his way to see the next city, and had to admit that it had the promise of being entertaining. That place was none other than Metropolis itself. Naruto whistled a bit as he was now looking at the outskirts of the city. He had gotten out of the woods after a while and was now there in front of the first city in his plan to see this world on a more personal level. So this is Metropolis, huh? Not as big as LA, but certainly a good sight. The blonde Hokage was very interested to see the world and the cities, namely those with recognized heroes, since he wanted to see what they were like in the flesh. He felt that one can only learn so much from magazines, rumor mills, and newspapers, and observing the people in question was a more complete way of understanding them. He still had his gear and weapons hidden in some scrolls should he need them, and at least he had his laptop to boot. And he was very keen on the idea on making sure to meet the heroes who resided here. He was already aware of Superman, but he was also aware that there were others in the city as well. He was aware of the one known as Steel, and the other being Superman's cousin, the one named Supergirl, who he had to admit was rather good looking and would have really gotten the attention of guys who were around his physical age and not his actual age, not to mention the attention of his godfather. He placed that aside, however, and decided to go into the city, but not before making a few changes to himself. He took to the direction of a nearby car stop and grabbed something to eat and then do the changes, then head into the city and go to his work. Besides, he might pick up some brand new ideas to add to his creations. All the while, he decided to work on that idea of him making an autobiography of himself and make a story out of it. He had no idea on how this might play out, but as he had learned very early in life, there was a first time for everything and this might pan out well in the end. In Metropolis. Not too bad. Naruto stated to himself as he walked through the city, as he was now disguised with his hair now deep brown and he placed on some contact lenses to change his eye color and also had a henge on to hide his whisker marks. He was now moving on with the rest of the city crowd and wanting to see just what this place was. He did have some prior reading on the city and knew that this was going to be an interesting area, considering that a good number of people reside here. Not to mention the fact that this was also the home turf of Superman, his cousin, Steel, and a few others. He was not sure what he was going to do when he would meet them in person, but he was going to have to prepare himself for anything that might happen while he was there. As he moved through the streets, he also made sure to keep his eyes and ears open as well as his battle-hardened senses for anything that might happen around him. The city was well known for having quite a number of more than interesting criminals and he had yet to meet them. Most of the time, he had to deal with the garden variety crooks and criminals as the Kyuubi snidely called them and thought that they were small fry compared to the criminal lords, ninjas, and more that he and the blonde Jinchuriki had dealt with in their time together. And to some point, Naruto had to agree, he was very curious what sort of high-powered criminals were there in this world that he would have to watch out for. He soon arrived at one of the most recognized places in the city, and that was none other than the Daily Planet. He had to admit that it was impressive by the standards of buildings back in Konoha, but he was not going to try and compare it. For now, however, he decided to go and grab a newspaper and see just what was on the news on this side of the world. He spotted a newspaper boy and asked for one and paid the guy with some of his money, and cracked open the news to see what would be there on the pages. One topic had to do with the actions of several countries on a variety of matters, another dealt with some new action by some celebrity or another, the actions of another company, though in the case of Metropolis there was only LexCorp in the spotlight. There was mention of Superman doing some more good deeds, though there was some dissent towards the hero that was there for Naruto to read. The former Hokage could not help but notice that in the picture, the man had stress lines on his face, and he could relate as despite his youthful appearance, he felt the arrival of the said lines on his face when he was doing his job as Hokage. No doubt the guy was working his butt off to try and redeem his name and Naruto had no problem with that as he expected it from the man. He looked at the rest of the newspaper and when he was getting tired of reading it, he decided to store away the newspaper in his backpack and moved on to see what else was going to happen. He stopped however when he spotted a number of people coming out of the tall building there. One of them appeared to be a dark-haired and blue-eyed woman who wore a white skirt, and a business-style top in light blue-violet color and no doubt wore a second type of shirt underneath. The other was a guy with wide shoulders, tall to boot, and while the suit made him look normal, Naruto was willing to bet that underneath said suit the guy was seriously well built. The glasses might also give him a look that showed he was harmless, but the last person he knew who wore glasses was not in any way, shape or form, harmless. The woman was very attractive in his mind and no doubt if he was still alive, his perverted godfather Jiraiya would already be making his move on her, and he would admit the same thing. But judging from the way the woman was with the man and how the man was close to the woman, that told him that he would not approve. Not to mention that the way the woman moved, showed that she was skilled in defending herself, not to the level of facing highly trained assassins yet, but close enough to handle the odd thug and overconfident fellow with lecherous intentions. The guy on the other hand sent warning bells in his head as he felt his danger senses warn him even more that this guy was not to be trifled with though he was not evil looking in the slightest. But for some oddball reason, he looked somewhat familiar to him. Why is it I get the feeling I know that guy? Naruto decided to try and get an image of the man and headed to a nearby camera store and decided to get a disposable camera, namely the kind that had no flash and would be easy to use. He was not sure what to make of these cameras as they were a load more advanced than the ones he had seen back home, but after a while he decided not to bother with the details on operation and focused on use. He then began to follow the group to see what was it about the guy that was making his ninja senses go on the alert and giving him the message that he was no ordinary person. He moved at the other side, making sure to keep himself controlled and invisible, and it seemed to work a good deal, that is until the group got into a taxi and were now on their way somewhere in the city. He could have gone after them on foot, but doing that was not an option. Naruto decided that now was the time to go up to the air. He moved a bit further and entered an alleyway, making sure that he was alone and no one was around to see him. Seeing that he was indeed alone, he quickly changed into his normal gear for ninja work and also got a bottle of water out to wash out the hair dye to return his hair to its natural blonde state. With that out of the way he quickly moved on the walls with chakra on his feet and moved to the roof. As he got there, he decided to switch to sage mode and focused on the dark-haired woman instead of the man. He had no idea if the man had the ability to sense him being tracked via chakra since no one in this world seemed to use let alone know of chakra the way he did, but no sense taking risky gambits this early. But the very second he was able to sense chakra, he was quite surprised to sense that man's chakra, it was not human in a very real sense, and he knew that as compared to the chakra of the people around him, along with the man in that car, the man's was denser to a level and also had a strange feel to it, almost like it was not part of the natural flow of chakra in a person, and he sensed that it was near cage level chakra or that of a Jinchuriki tapping into the initial stage of the tailed form, something he knew very well. He got up and decided to follow the signature but not before deploying 2 Cage Bushin the remain behind and gather more chakra for him to use. The nature energy here was a bit dull due to the modernization of the place but not that bad to others. It took a while for him to follow the car as he used his kunai with the wire to move from building to building while using his chakra which was channeled to his feet to hold on to the walls, and using his senses in sage mode to follow the car until it reached its destination and at least it was near some docks. That allowed him to try and get a better vantage point and where he quickly returned to using henge, only this time he took the appearance of one of the many dock workers while making sure to change his hair color a bit with some chakra application. He made sure to keep himself cool and calm as he tracked the trio and they were soon before a man who Naruto guessed was the one they came to see. He watched them carefully, silently hoping that he was going to find out just who the big guy was and as soon as the man began to take notes and speak his turn, he waited. For what he had no idea and as soon as the interview was over, the blonde noted him place his arms on his chest in a cross pattern as he seemed to smile at something as the two who were with him were rather animated in their discussion. He decided to take a shot at it and took a picture of the man. Once he did so, he decided to try another experiment and headed towards the trio. He knew that he had to time it right and make it look like an accident as he took out some of his loose change from his pocket. He then dropped the coins down and made sure that some of the change rolled to the direction of the people in question. He then spoke out as the coins stopped before the trio. Damn it, they rolled out of my pockets again. That worked as the man he had been looking at and observing moved to his knees to help get the coins and spoke to him as soon as he got up and offered the coins to him. Here you go. I think it's better that you have a wallet on hand next time. Naruto smiled a bit at that and replied as normally as he could manage. He gave a sheepish grin and scratched the back of his head as he pocketed his coins and spoke. Sorry about that. I was a bit of a butterfingers with coins growing up. My name's Curtis Riley, new here in the docks, you are. Hello then Curtis, the name is Clark Kent from Smallville. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that though he did that very slowly. Smallville. There's a place with that kind of name. Better focus on the mission of finding out more of this guy. Nice to meet ya as well Clark. Anyway, you happen to be a reporter I take it. Yeah, from the Daily Planet, and so are my friends here, meet Lois Lane. Naruto looked at Lois Lane and mentally whistled at the way she looked, which was definitely a looker with the dark hair, well-featured face, and eyes. Not to mention the figure to boot. He extended his hand and she shook his hand as well. In that moment, he was able to tell that despite her being a beauty, this lady had some strong muscle tone and with his battle-hardened senses, could tell that she had combat training, possibly self-defense. He decided to keep his normal persona under wraps and just stick to the persona he developed when in henge. Good to meet you Miss Lane. Same to you Curtis, you full or part-time? Part-time, supposed to be signing off today anyway. Lois nodded and that was when Clark introduced the orange-haired and freckle-faced guy next to them. And this is Jimmy Olsen, one of our photographers in the Daily Planet. Naruto looked at the guy and saw that he was fresh-faced, eager, dedicated, and also very energetic, reminded him slightly of himself when he was still younger. It made him grin in his usual fashion and spoke to Jimmy. Nice to meet ya Jimmy. Likewise, I am also one of the best photographers in the planet, you can ask both Clark and Lois, I worked with them a long time. I see, anyway, I have to get a move on, Don, want my bosses to be thinking I was slacking off. As soon as he left them, Naruto kept himself focused on getting away from them without raising any alarm bells and it was not long before he was in the clear. He sighed a bit and removed the henge. But that was when he heard a massive explosion happening in the same docks, and felt the explosion as well. He looked to see what was going on and it seemed that the dock workers had an accident and he looked around carefully to see the people there moving around in different directions, some ran away, others moved in to see what was going on, and other moved in to help. That was when he noted that Clark had disappeared from Lois and Jimmy. He raised an eyebrow at that and then spotted none other than Superman. He kept himself hidden as best he could and calm as he watched the Man of Steel as he was called in saving the people who were in the area of the detonation. Once that was done and the fire department came, he saw Superman talking to the dock workers on what happened and he was in a pose that he recognized easily with the stoic but calm and relaxed look. Naruto took the picture of that and soon left. Hours later. Man, feels good to be on a bed. Naruto said as he was now resting in a hotel that he managed to pay for with his funds from being a writer, and he was soon going to have room service brought up for dinner an hour or so later. It annoyed him that they did not have ramen but decided to try other food as well to see how it would fare. For now however, some rest was in order as well as a meal. He dozed off for at least an hour or so as he had gone off to have the pictures developed and soon paid for them and got to the hotel. He had only dozed off for an hour or so before he heard the doorbell and the call. Room service. Naruto woke up quickly and headed to the door and opened it to let the man walk in with a tray. It still amazed him that a guy could actually come here and order food and drink in the comfort of their own room. Sure, he had food in his own place and could ask Ayame and the ones she and her father hired at times for food deliveries come to the Hokage residence, but this was different either way since he did not have to pay a large amount for it. He however placed that aside and began to eat the food once it was on his table. The food comprised of salmon sashimi, roasted beef, hot potatoes, and rice balls along with a pitcher of cold lemon tea. The food was custom ordered by him and since he was going to be in here in Metropolis, he was going to make the most of it. He was happy that he had gotten a lot of money to stay in the hotel for a week and a half. Once he was done eating, he decided to get to work and see what was it that made him think that this Clark Kent was hiding something about himself. He got the pictures he had and also began with the picture of Clark. He took out a scroll he had hidden and called out a kunai. He then channeled a bit of his wind chakra to increase the cutting power. He had to be careful though since overdoing it might cut through the table and even the floor, and the last thing he wanted was to explain to the people who owned the place why one of their tables was cut in half or worse. Once he was done with what he had in mind, he made his next move and there he made a very interesting discovery. Well now, this is a surprise. Naruto looked at the image before him and smirked slightly. He had taken the newly acquired picture of Superman that he had from the docks only hours before and had placed the cutouts of the man he had pictured on the image of Superman, namely the suit, shoes, and glasses minus the eyes. And when he looked at the image, he could not help but see the similarities, and what he sensed from his use of senjutsu only served to convince him further. He decided for now to place the discovery he made aside as he then decided to destroy the images. Clark Kent was Superman and apparently was working in that place called the Daily Planet as a cover. And he could not help but shake his head at how no one but him had figured out the true identity of the hero of Metropolis. Then again, if one were to look at Clark, despite the size and build, he looked like a guy who got beaten on for his lunch money on a regular basis. He should know since he used to get hit a lot by bullies as a kid before he developed a reputation as prankster without equal and also developed his taijutsu skills. As he took the images, he decided to rely on his wind chakra to slice the pictures into nothing but bite-sized chunks and stuffed them into the trash bin. He could have gone for fire chakra, but that would have triggered the fire alarms and he was not in the mood for that to happen. He then took a shower, and when he was done with the said shower, he got back into the room and opened the curtains to see the city and admitted that it looked nice at night. Once that was done, he decided to open up his laptop and begin to write his stories, connecting his portable internet USB drive and getting to work, as it was time to earn another internet paycheck. In the meantime, he was going to do something in Metropolis to get feel of the place and also see if he could see Superman in action, as well as learn more of him to see just what sort of guy he was underneath the cape. The next day, Naruto was up and about early in the morning and decided to call the desk that he planned to go outside early and have his room locked down until he got back. He had spent at least 6 hours on his latest work as Sage Thompson and also began to send the drafts for his own comic. He made it up as a way to chronicle his own life and decided to use his first name as the title of the comic and the character, and using the name Masashi Kishimoto as his pen name for this side of the deck. It was a name that seemed right to him and he went to work in making the history of the place that he had grown up on Japan and had learned about anime and manga and wanted to make his own series that could be accepted in Western audience groups. That was why he also decided that when he had the chance, he was going to learn how to draw manga, and since he had good enough memories of his fellow ninja and the people in the elemental nations, allies and enemies, he could draw them. It was just a try and he was not sure how effective it was, but no sense not trying something new every now and then. He also recalled that it was the way that Jiraiya made the book that shaped his life and that of Nagato, who he found out later in life was one of his fellow clansmen in the Uzumaki side of things, and he hoped had found peace in the afterlife alongside his family and friends. If he could make a story about the life he lived that could inspire others as that book Jiraiya made inspired others, then why not do it? Besides, if he had to do book signing, there was always Hench. Once he was done with that and saved the files, he left the hotel and carried a special note in his pockets. Once he felt that he was in the clear, he moved to an alleyway and out of sight of anyone else. He then decided to get decked out in his regular clothes and see the city the only way he liked. He quickly climbed up the nearby wall and tossed out his kunai to the next building and began to move around the city, sampling the sights and already seeing the first rays of sunlight coming up to cover the city. And as he moved from place to place, he looked down to see how the people were, and they were acting like the people he had seen back there in LA. Some moved about to do their daily chores, other went to work, some wandered about, and enjoying the day. And naturally when he moved over them in his outfit and mask, they were soon reacting, though in a way that he did not expect as they spoke out. Look, up in the sky. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, I have no idea what or who that is. There were people looking up at him as he moved over the city using his kunai with the wire and on occasion his own chakra chains, and he wagered a guess this was how Superman would be known, seeing as this was the man's home city. And he found the lines rather amusing to boot. As he moved over the ropes and swinging away like a maniac, he stopped over at the Daily Planet and figured he could move around to say hi as it were. In Perry's office. Perry was currently discussing some matters pertaining to the incident yesterday with his reporters, and naturally two of his best, Lois Lane and Clark Kent, were there along with the others. He was eager to see if they could find some news about Superman and see if they could help change the image he had on him, and they had good reason to do so. Perry held Superman in high regard and wanted to try and help him recover the trust of the people, and while he knew that Superman was doing an admirable job already in trying to clear his name, it was far from easy. Not many people were willing to forgive Superman for being used to invade their world by Darkseid, even though it had already been known that Superman had been brainwashed and was not himself. All right, where do we stand with Superman? One spoke. Still all right, Chief, but not everyone in Metropolis is going to let it go. I know that, but we know that he's been working his butt off to clear his name, and I can even see the lines on his face, and I don't leave the office until 5. We could at the very least help him out so he does not have to go all out. Unknown to Perry, Clark was smiling as he knew that at least here in his workplace, he had a good number of supporters, Lois being one of them, which helped him deal with a lot of things. Part of him wanted to tell her the truth that he and Superman were the same, but if experience was anything to go by, if she knew who he really was and others found out about it, they would be gunning after her in no time flat. And he was not in the mood for them to attack the woman he happened to be very much attracted to. Lois turned and noted the smile on Clark's face and smiled a bit as she nudged him gently on the ribs. You okay there, Smallville? Clark turned and nodded a bit while smiling. Yeah, I am fine, just thinking about how Superman must feel to have supporters here in the planet. Yeah, he's done a lot for the city and the people, so he does deserve to have allies here, right? Plus he's not lied before to anyone either, so we won't lie about him. Not like the other news stations have been doing lately. Before anyone could say anything though, one of the staff came into the office and shouted out. Chief, we got news. The assembled reporters turned and Perry spoke next. What's going on? We've heard that some of the people in the streets have seen a guy moving around the city in the air. Who? That was when another voice came on the scene, outside the window of Perry's office. That would be me, Datbayo. The assembled group of reporters and one disguised Kryptonian turned as one to the window, and there sure enough was the Hokage, decked in full attire and crouching on the ledge and giving them a wave. He looked at Lois and seemed to smile at her and winked at the same time. That made Lois raise an eyebrow and a frown from Clark as Perry spoke to the man before them all who was disguised. You're the Hokage. What are you doing here in Metropolis? What? A guy can't take a tour of the cities every now and then just cause he wears a mask. I won't be here long, so don't worry. I ain't here to upstage Superman either. I am just here to see the city and the rest of the country, but if there's anything happening down there that ain't good, then I won't hesitate to help. See ya. Naruto turned and then unleashed his chakra chain, and the energy chain soon got to a nearby building, digging into the concrete, and off he went, swinging away off to the rest of the city. Leaving behind a group of people who were surprised at the appearance of a hero who was supposed to be based only in the LA area. Clark had managed to see through the mask and was surprised to see that the Hokage was actually a teenager who looked to be at least 17 or younger, at least as far as he was able to see. In hindsight, that made the Hokage not much older than Kara in a sense, and he decided to get a chance to talk to the youth, but not before going to get some help. He did appreciate the fact that the Hokage seemed to be the kind who helped others, but he was not going to take any chances too early until he knew the young man more. Already the reporters moved out and the Daily Planet were on the move to see if they could track and pin down the Hokage, and find out just what was the reason he was here in Metropolis. They were not the only ones, however, as one certain corrupt but intelligent businessman, criminal mastermind, was also interested on what was going on, now that his secretary had informed him of the sighting. This new hero was thought to have resided in LA only, so why he was here was a very interesting thing. And after seeing the abilities of this being, looking him over was going to be something that would be possibly worth the time and investment. In the city. The blonde moved through the city with chakra chains and wired kunai and then spotted what appeared to be a bunch of thugs robbing a bank, in broad daylight no less. He blown wondered just what was going through the minds of the criminals in Metropolis. They should already know that Superman called this place him, and from what he learned, the police here were top-notch when it counted, so why bother robbing the place when it was either going to be the cops or Superman and those with him that were going to come in and get you? Either they've gotten used to seeing him, or they're thinking with all the things he's been doing, he is not going to be around. The blonde Jinchuriki decided that now was the right time to at least halt this, and who knows, he might run into the heroes of the city in question later. He moved to the next building, and once he used his chakra chain, quickly moved to where the bank was and quickly tossed out some wire and grabbed one of the crooks as he flew overhead. The guy cried out as he was yanked off of his feet and was soon finding himself hanging over the street, tied up in wire over a street pole. The group of thugs below looked up and saw Naruto as he was crouching over the pole and looking at them. The same could be said for the police, as they had been expecting Superman, Supergirl, or Steel to be here, not this guy in a mask. One of the thugs shouted and aimed a shotgun as Naruto, and Naruto quickly flicked his hand and out came a shuriken that lodged itself right in the front of the barrel as he moved in, leaping at the man. The guy screamed like a little girl as Naruto knocked him down to the ground and was out like a light as the former Hokage made his move and rolled to land a solid rising side kick to the head of one of the thugs, sending him to the side and out cold like his buddy. The other guy tried to attack him with a hidden knife, but Naruto quickly got out a kunai and used the ring on the handle to catch said knife and with some quick movements moved the blade away and disarmed the guy and then introduced an elbow charge into the guy's sternum. That sent the man down as Naruto quickly used the kunai he had to stab the guy next to him, but not in a fatal place as he nailed the guy to the wall. He turned to face the last robber, but that was handled well enough as the guy was now surrendering to the police, and for good reason as three figures appeared nearby. Naruto could not help but whistle as he was now face to face with none other than Supergirl herself, along with her cousin, Superman. He had expected one of them to turn up when that bank robbery was going on, but not both of them at the same time. As far as he could see, the Man of Steel was a lot more imposing in person than in the pictures, though he noted some stress lines on his face and he did not look as healthy as his other pictures did, though he had seen some fairly new ones. No doubt he had been working non-stop to repair his good name and the effects were there for him to see. Naruto had to give this guy credit for that and he smiled a bit underneath the mask he wore and gave them a wave. Well now, nice to finally meet Superman and company. Sorry about the mess, it wasn't my best effort but at least they did not get far. Superman sighed a bit as he and the two others landed. Kara eyed the thugs a bit and was slightly surprised at how fast they had been taken down. She had heard of the Hokage in the news, but did not view it all that much as she believed that if you've seen one metahuman, you've seen them all, regardless of the powers. It was not that she was against them or anything, but she was used to meeting them a lot so she was a bit used to it. Steel on the other hand was curious how this new guy got here and somehow avoided revealing himself to anyone until now. The guy looked to be alright but Steel was not going to rely entirely on first impressions. Superman then stepped forward and spoke to the Hokage and Naruto wondered just what was it that the man was going to talk to him about. How old are you, Hokage? That was something that Naruto was not expecting for a moment, until he recalled something about Superman. Apparently he had some form of powerful vision. Some rumors said that it allowed him to see through things. That was rumors, but if there was one thing Naruto knew to be true, sometimes rumors were a bit too close to the truth. Everyone thought that Rinnegan was a mutation and was not going to come back again the world, but it did in Nagato, Toby, and Madara. Everyone thought that the Jubi and the Sage were stories and they turned out to be true, so if this guy had the ability to see through things, then he was not going to take a chance and think that it's not possible. Why are you asking Superman? Clark sighed a bit and spoke. You look to be around at least 16 or something, shouldn't you be in school or something instead of risking your life? You should not doing these things as if it's a fantasy thing kids have in their heads. Naruto felt a tick rise to the side of his head at that comment. Sure, he looked young due to his bloodline, senjutsu training, and the Kyuubi's chakra, but being called or at the least implied as being a kid was a bit too darn annoying for his liking. He would have found it funny and would have joked about it or laughed it off, but being called a kid as if he was a newbie in fighting was annoying to him. He wasted no time and got into the face of Superman, surprising him, Steel, and Supergirl as not many people would do that to him, and it seemed that some of the people who had cameras were also surprised and half expected the two heroes to get into a fight. What did you call me? Something about the tone in the Hokage's voice told Clark that he had taken offense to that, and seeing the angry expression through the mask with the X-ray vision confirmed it. That was enough information to tell Clark that he should try to talk to the young man and resolve this before it got ugly. Look, I didn't want to sound offensive to you since I have seen you in action already on the news from LA, but you're rather young to be doing this kind of thing. You can do a lot better things before you try taking into this kind of life, you know. Naruto then pointed to Supergirl and spoke seriously. And she isn't a bit too young for this line of work. Supergirl was a bit annoyed. Or rather, very annoyed at the guy pointing at her. Sure, she was rather young by Argonian terms, but she had already done her fair share of crime fighting and had even helped in stopping Darkseid's invasion, along with stopping her cousin when he was brainwashed and went rogue. To be pointed at and called a kid by a new arrival was something she was not too keen on, and she made that clear as she stomped over to the blonde Hokage and spoke. Who are you calling a kid, Buster? Naruto was not too put out as being glared at by a rather attractive blonde-haired and blue-eyed female in her choice of outfit was not too bad a thing, and he could understand the reaction as he would have reacted the same way. But he was not going to let that stop him from saying his piece. He was no longer a kid and had more than enough years to be as cranky and serious as he wanted. You look to be around what, 16 or 17? 17's my age and I am no kid. I've been doing this for a while now and I am no slouch. Well, neither am I, and for your information, I am no kid. If there's anyone around here who's been getting on in the years, that would be me. Clark was curious about that as he looked once more at the young man whose mask he could see through with his X-ray vision. The guy looked to be around the age he had seen, though he noted some signs of experience, so maybe calling him a kid was a bit of a mistake, and he did show age on his whiskered face. But he also noted that his eyes, which were deep blue, also spoke of something old and experienced, so maybe he might have jumped the gun, as it were. That was lost to Supergirl, who was not using her X-ray vision, as she was still locked in a glaring match with Naruto while Steel was looking on, trying to get a feel of the situation and possibly try to defuse it before it got worse. But before anything could happen, there was a large explosion off in the distance, and that got the attention of the group as Clark spoke. "This will have to wait. We need to go and find out what just happened." "But, Kara, now is not the time. We need to check this out. We can talk with Hokage about this at a later date." Kara sighed reluctantly and gave the blonde shinobi a glare as she was soon joining her cousin as Clark turned to face Naruto. "Listen, I can understand that you want to do this to help or be recognized, but you're still new to this kind of life, so try to live a normal life, okay?" As the heroes left, Naruto glared at Clark. He knew the guy meant well, but if he had even the slightest idea of what he had been through, what he said was not going to count for much. Naruto had lived a life that would have made most young men and women who were just regular folks quake in their shoes, and had faced so many life or death situations that had he been a regular kid, as Superman had put it, he would have either been given an early funeral, sent to child services, or considered mentally unstable. Live a normal life? Ha! I'd rather not, thank you very much. And I am not doing this to be recognized, at least not yet. Naruto was tempted to go ahead and let them deal with whatever it was that got their attention away from him, but something was tagging his senses and telling him to go and see things through. Besides that, he was rather eager to see just how good Superman, Supergirl, and Steel were in action. Now to see if these people, or whatever they are as good as the newspapers make them to be. The blonde shinobi quickly tossed out a kunai connected with metal wire to a nearby wall, which was reinforced by his chakra. Once the kunai bit hard into the wall, he began to move up and swing to the wall. Once he got there, he clamped onto the wall with chakra and began to move quickly from building to building by using another kunai. This process was not as fast as his chakra chains of the flying thunder god jutsu of his father, but it was going to help him a lot and keep his real power hidden away from those who managed to take a look at him. As he made it there, he spotted a large number of people gathering and saw that there were several armored trucks that were smoking, telling him that this was like that event he had dealt with before. He moved up to a high tower and looked to observe how the two cousins and their armor-to-the-skin companion were doing. They seemed to be doing fine with the bank robbers as the two super-powered siblings crashed in and blocked the bullets from the men. Naruto knew what guns were and had to admit that they scared him a bit since they were faster moving and therefore harder to block, but he knew that they made quite a racket and needed to be maintained more than most, even if one had bought the attachments to silence them. He found that out by checking out a gun owner's magazine when he decided to find out just what were those strange devices used by the police and the robbers he had fought with before. Superman and Supergirl took the hits and the bullets merely bounced off of them, and the same could be said for Steel's armored form. The first two were a bit surprising to Naruto, and the second was to be expected since the guy had a lot of plating on him. Naruto watched the trio and saw that they were doing all right, and the blonde cousin of Superman was proving not to be a slouch when it came to socking bad guys in the jaw. But that was when two green beams smashed into Superman and he could hear the pain coming from the guy in blue and red. That shout was just the beginning as Superman was sent flying back into one of the armored cars. He could already hear the results of the Man of Steel being sent flying away from his comrades as Supergirl called out to her cousin in shock. He watched as she turned to find out who attacked them, but got her own answer as another pair of beams came at her direction. She managed to fly up, but the shooter hit her and she too hit the ground fast and hard, and she was also in pain. Steel turned and sure enough out came the enemy as Naruto himself got to see him. And he was definitely different. There was a torn face there, and yet the rest of him was all metal, wires, and a host of other glowing parts that Naruto had no idea about. At first he thought he was looking at an all-metal version of the combat puppets used by Suna Ninja and Gaara's brother Kenkiro, but as he stretched his chakra senses a bit, he was surprised to find that there was some life in that being. And in the back of his mind, he felt the Kyuubi stir in him. He watched as that guy with the metallic body fought with Steel, and for a moment or so, it seemed that they were evenly matched. That is until the living being of metal managed to sidestep a strike to the head and kick Steel in the stomach. The sound of metal hitting metal made even him wince from where he was, and he wondered if Steel was still alive. The guy was and seemed to be still able to take the fight to his foe as he swung that massive sledgehammer again. The strike hit the metallic being and sent him crashing into a nearby van, and it seemed to be over, but that was until the guy came back and tossed a massive steel slab at Steel. The man managed to smash it aside with his hammer, but that was the opening the guy needed to charge in and hit Steel with a kick to the chest and followed with a knee and a serious right hook. Superman and Supergirl tried to get up, but then the guy fired the same green-colored beams at both of them, and Naruto saw both Superman and Supergirl take the hits and cry out in pain. The metal being came closer, and it was there that Naruto noted the man's chest open. to reveal a large glowing green rock and that seemed to throw his senses off a bit, telling him that glowing hunk of stone was a lot more dangerous than it looked. The state of the heroes was pretty bad, so now it was time for him to move, as he now recalled just how this figure was. Metallo was pleased, as he was now going to finally eliminate the two thorns to his side. Steel was a problem if he was not watched, but as soon as Supergirl and Superman were out of the way, that armored man was done for. And he could not help but relish the weakened and pained looks of both cousins as he taunted them. You both are finally going to be gone from here, and maybe I can finally get the chance to rule over this damned city once I dispose of a certain backstabbing businessman. Now let's get down to me getting rid of you both permanently. Before he could finish his rant of the heroes, Metallo felt several rather sharp scrapping sounds, and he turned to see some sharp metallic discs burying themselves into the concrete, and soon he spotted Naruto himself. Metallo growled at his new attacker and spoke to Naruto. So you're Los Angeles hero on the block, huh? The Hokage as they call you. What in the blazes are you doing here in Metropolis? The blonde in the meantime was a bit more silent. Seeing this walking monstrosity of metal and whatnot made him remember the times he had to deal with ninjas who used puppets, and also the story of Sakura's battle with Sasori himself. The worst, however, was when Toby used the bodies of dead ninja as his own puppets of war long ago. There had been a few other battles with ninjas willing to do anything for power in his time, even giving up their bodies to do so, and those kinds of people gave Naruto more than his fair share of headaches. This one, the one he read about as Metallo, was a totally different kettle of fish. But it was obvious that this guy was no pushover. Metallo was beginning to lose his cool and quickly grabbed a nearby pole from the road and tossed it like a spear at Naruto. Hey, it's considered bad manners to ignore someone asking questions. Naruto quickly took out one of his swords and channeled his chakra into it and cut the pole in half, then quickly vanishing from sight, much to Metallo's surprise, and appeared behind him. And where I come from, Tin Man, it's twice as rude to be throwing spears at people. Metallo turned and saw the young man cock a fist at him, and he grinned. Or tried to grin, as he was thinking that this guy did not have the strength to hit him as Superman would, and he made that obvious as he spoke. Go ahead, give me your best shot. He showed his metallic chin, expecting the arrogant but fast young man to be screaming in pain with a broken hand, wrist, and arm. What he did not expect is to be punched hard enough to literally send him flying backwards off his feet and smashing into the armored van. The van was caved in and sent back a bit, much to the surprise of the onlookers and to all three heroes, as they had not expected that. Clark had thought that the glowing sphere of energy was the reason he was able to cave in the truck from his debut on TV, while Kara and Steel had thought that few could knock Metallo like that. As for Metallo, he could not help but shake himself a bit and look at the young man, who did not even show any sign of pain in his punch, and he had to admit that he was not expecting that blonde to be that strong. As for Naruto, he silently thanked Sakura and Tsunade for the training in channeling chakra into his body to increase his overall strength. He had decided to test this attack and reserve his Senjutsu chakra if he needed an edge, or his purified Kyuubi chakra, since the latter was not ideal for something like this. And it seemed that he would not have to resort to that just yet, which was a good thing to the blonde shinobi as he readied his sword to fight again. You've got some serious muscles there, Hokage. Always thought only Superman or his cousin could hit me that hard. But you can't harm me, I am indestructible. Yeah, I've heard that before, Metal Brain. You planning to fight or talk me to death? Metallo glared and got up, grabbed a large section of the armored car and quickly tossed it at Naruto like a frisbee, a razor-sharp and jagged metallic frisbee to be more accurate. Naruto wasted no time and quickly flipped over the attack and moved to face Metallo. The two attacked one another with fists and sword. Metallo proved to be rather tough to Naruto, as his sword was not cutting at all, and that made Metallo grin like a maniac as he taunted the blonde. See, your sword's useless against me. Naruto remained silent and quickly flipped back as Metallo decided to take a shot and charged right at Naruto, intent on giving the young man a serious punch to the jaw. Naruto, however, was quick on his feet and dodged the punch, rolled out of the way when Metallo tried a knee strike, and then flipped up to land a seriously strong chakra-enhanced spinning side kick to the head of the cyborg and sent him forward and trying to balance himself. This allowed Naruto to quickly come up with a plan, and when it came to play, he charged at Metallo, who recovered and launched a fist at Naruto, who moved out of the way and dropped some smoke bombs. The bombs went off, but Metallo was able to recover, turn around and launch an attack at Naruto as the smoke was soon moving away. Nice move, Blondie. You might actually know how to be a ninja, but old trick don't work on one who has special vision. The attack caught Naruto in the stomach and the blonde groaned as Metallo grinned at that, while the others looked on in shock and horror. Clark most of all, since he had tried to move and assist the Hokage in fighting Metallo, but the attacks Metallo had used had weakened him. The same could be said for Kara and for Steel. He was still trying to get his armor to recover from the attacks, and she was also trying to fight off the effects of the kryptonite blasts. But they and the others, including Metallo, were in for a surprise when Naruto looked up and grinned, speaking as if the attack did nothing to him at all. Too bad you were looking at the wrong Hokage, Tin Man. The people watched as Naruto's body suddenly poofed away and there were large numbers of paper tags there with some form of writing. The tags were also suddenly burning and before Metallo could react, the tags exploded with the force of several crates of TNT. Naruto had been busy enhancing the explosive qualities of his explosive tags recently and the results of said changes were obvious as Metallo was sent flying backwards off his feet. He looked and was surprised to see Naruto above him and then release several kunai that were also tagged with explosive tags. These weapons quickly lodged in the area where his kryptonite heart was and due to the enhanced explosions were enough to force the panels open. He hit the ground hard and before he could react, Naruto was there with a very large sphere of glowing energy in hand as the blonde shinobi struck hard. Take this in that rock heart of yours. Odama Rasengan. The very second the attack connected to Metallo's kryptonite heart, the blast was immediate and unleashed a massive cloud of debris all over the place. The ground shook with the force of a bomb going off and there was a large scream coming from Metallo. The people who were there braced themselves and covered their eyes as the blast of wind and dust was everywhere. It took a while before the smoke cleared and there was a very deep crater on the ground. That was when they spotted Metallo being carried out by the Hokage on his shoulder as if he was a feather pillow and then tossed aside and in the area where the kryptonite heart was, it was not there anymore. The blonde looked about and then did some hand gestures and then to the eyes of everyone in the area, there were several puffs of smoke and there appeared more of the Hokage, at least a dozen or more as the middle spoke to them. Go and find any of those rocks and get them all gathered. Hi. With that done the other Hokages moved away as the apparent original moved to get to the three heroes. Kara tried to get up as she felt the effects of the kryptonite injuries fade away a bit more, but to her surprise, the Hokage then scooped her up in his arms bridal style and moved to a nearby bus shed that was not totaled by the fighting. That was something that no one expected to see, least of all Kara who was blushing as she looked at Naruto. You all right? Kara said nothing as she was still trying to get used to the fact that only minutes ago, she was trading barbs and glaring matches with this guy and now she was rescued by said guy. She looked at him and despite her weakened state used her X-ray vision to see him, and got another reason to blush when she saw Naruto's face, and she had to admit that he was rather good looking. Naruto had no idea why the super-powered blonde teen was turning red on the face, but he would have to be a liar to say that he did not find it rather attractive and amusing. It was only when he realized that like her cousin she can have vision to see through things so she must have seen his face and that made him smirk mentally. But he managed to get his thoughts focused and spoke once more as they reached the bus shed. Hey, not that I mind the looking and all, but I asked if you were all right. Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Just need to rest up a bit more. Naruto grinned behind his mask and as soon as he looked away, the Kage Bushin were coming back. Keeping in mind how the two flying heroes reacted to the rock of green he made sure to ask something to the recovering Superman who was with them now as Steel was back on his feet, and apparently alive and breathing to boot. You have anything that can shield you from that glowing rock powering Tin Man over there? Yeah, it's lead, that's the only stuff that can block the kryptonite radiation. Huh, so that's the name of said rock. All right then, I'll just have my buddies take it a long distance away and when you recover enough, they will tell me where they hid it so you can get that lead stuff you need. Clark had no idea how that was possible and was about to ask when Naruto spoke to him once more while pointing at a very tall building at the distance. They said that they placed all of the pieces in a very large bag on that tower over there, can you see it? Clark did so and sure enough, the bag was there, held by metallic wire and he could see that the kryptonite was there in the bag so he was assured that the man was not hiding it from him and the others. Yes I can. Good, see you Superman, or should I call you Clark Kent? Clark's eyes widened at that as he turned around to face Naruto and it took a lot of his willpower to not react to the fact that the Hokage had just figured out. But as he did so, all he saw was a swirling circle of leaves as Naruto was no longer there. The only thing he saw was a note which was sealed with the man's leaf signature. He took it up and saw that there was a message. To Superman Clark Kent. Don't worry about your identity, I am not telling anyone since I can tell that you are a good man and you carry a lot of burdens on your shoulders, namely that incident with that, Dark, whatever that alien nutjob's name is. I might sound weird but I know what it's like to be treated with disdain and suspicion, and I know the desire to work hard to prove yourself that you are a different person and not what others think you are. I read all there is to know about you before and after that, and I have to say, you have a lot of guts and grit, I like that a lot. You could have used your powers to do what you like and kick the law on the ass, I know how that goes since I used to give the law the finger when I was younger. But you used your powers for the right reasons, and I learned to fight for a better purpose than just pulling pranks and causing mischief. That's why I respect you so I promise to you as a ninja and as the Hokage I will not reveal your identity to anyone for as long as I live and I wish you the best in what you do Datbeo. P.S. This note is going to burn up so I suggest you drop it. I'm not kidding by the way, the special seal I put in it kicks in a minute after that note's opened. Clark then was surprised when the note did burst into flame which quickly reduced it to ash and he could not help but shake his head as Kara walked up to him. What happened? Where did he go? Clark shook his head and spoke to Kara in private. He knows who I am. Kara's eyes widened as she digested that bit of information. Clark's part of being Superman had been one of the best kept secrets they both had, and now it seemed that someone else knew about it. How did that even happen in the first place? She looked at her cousin and spoke to him as calmly as she could possibly manage. How did he do it? I don't know, but he said he was not going to reveal it. And for some reason I get the feeling that he is telling the truth, Kara. Are you sure, Clark? For all we know he was lying to make you lower your guard or something. I know, but the fact is that he went out of his way to get that kryptonite away from us, and if he wanted to reveal how he knew who I really am, he could have done it the very second he found out about it. All we can do is see if he is going to do what he promised. Later. Naruto was back in his hotel and had taken all of his clothing, weapons, and armor back into the storage scrolls and sat down to begin meditating to heal himself with Senjutsu chakra. The battle with that Metallo guy was definitely a step above the norm. The only thing he felt could come close was the battle his wife Sakura, alongside the old lady of Tsunochiyo with the Akatsuki member and puppet prodigy Sasori. That kind of foe was something that Naruto was not fully prepared for, but he had to admit that the battle was interesting. And it seemed that as he recovered from the injuries, the Kyuubi, or rather Kurama, agreed with him. Finally we get to have a chance to fight a decent fight. That metallic being in human form was a far better challenge than those punks and low-level wretches we dealt with before. You seem happy all of a sudden, Kurama. Weren't you listening to me, brat? If this is but one villain, then perhaps this world can be challenging after all. Well, I'm glad you approve, because if that battle was any indication, this world's got a lot more in store for us. About bloody time too. This place was getting boring. Say, why don't we try and see if we can handle facing that Superman in a sparring match? That should make sure you can get the damned rust in your joints to leave. You want to run that by me again, Kurama? You want me to face Superman in a match? You realize that the guy's got cage-level chakra in him, even to the point he's got the chakra level to be close to a Jinchuriki in initial form. And he's not even a human to boot, he's not even an enemy of ours or a criminal, and you want me to fight him? Don't be such a wuss, Naruto. You haven't had a decent workout of a fight for weeks to a month here in this world. Even back there in where we came from, the fights have been few and far in between. You might train your butt off every now and then, but nothing beats fighting an actual opponent, and even Kage Bushin will not cut it anymore. Besides, it's a sparring match, not a death match, you blonde-haired dolt, and you have to admit that fighting someone like that is something that can really be a good way to get you back to shape. I cannot believe I just heard you say that. Let's just focus on staying off the radar for now. The less likely we get attention to ourselves, the better. Now I am the one who is shocked. You actually want to stay off the radar. What happened to the blonde dolt who loved to get attention whenever he could? He grew up, and I were to recall, you approved of it. Ha, point taken, so we're going to just stay here in the city then? No, I'm off to see the rest of the world, maybe Gotham City, heard the place should be interesting. The Kyuubi seemed to accept that, and while Naruto could tell that Kurama was now taking another nap, he could tell that his resident Biju was mumbling about the chance to finally find some new and worthy foes to fight. And truth be told, he was actually looking forward to the chance to finally fight some worthwhile foes as well. For now, however, he decided to lay low and just observe while writing more of his stories before packing it up and going to Gotham City. He was also going to check out just what other villains were out there in the city to see just what he could dig up, as well as possibly find some more inspiration, as his old sensei and godfather used to call it. Once he felt fully recovered, he went back to writing as he began to recall some of his adventures with his allies back in his world, plus he recalled just who he had seen, namely a certain reporter lady, and Superman's cousin. For the rest of the week, Naruto remained incognito, a feat that Kurama was still trying to grasp considering the way Naruto acted in their world, and had focused only on making his next set of books and also on that story that was based on his life. He did on occasion go out to see the rest of Metropolis and also take a peek at what else he could see as well as who else. On one occasion, he got to tangle with none other than Livewire, formerly known as Leslie Wilkins. The female villain had been terrorizing some of the residents and trying to cause mayhem when he decided to step in while wearing his full costume, armor, and weapons, and while Livewire laughed at his looks a bit, he was on full combat mode. He decided to use a jutsu he took years to develop to counter Livewire's ability to use electricity, which was similar to the lightning armor used by the 5th Raikage. The wind moved at extreme speeds around him and even gave him the ability to fly, which was something that Livewire did not anticipate, and it seemed that while he was from another world, the principles of chakra-controlled elements seemed to work here still, as he was able to handle some if not all of her attacks. He then used his water jutsu that he spent a lot of time learning from both Kakashi when his Jonin sensei was still alive and also from Mei, who taught her use of water jutsu to him. He unleashed a powerful series water blasts to force her back and then unleashed a wave of Mizubushin. That was no mean feat since water-based chakra was not his type, but it worked as Livewire was shorted out and he left the scene, but not before leaving a note to Superman. Once he got back to the hotel, he bemoaned the fact that during the battle, his cloak got singed a bit by a lightning blast from the crazy woman, though Kurama replied that it was a small price to pay to face a new and interesting foe. He kept his promise and did not reveal Clark's role as Superman, and when he finally decided to leave Metropolis, he went back to the planet in Henge, as a delivery guy, made his way to where Clark's desk was and left another note. One that said that he was now leaving the city and still intended to make sure that he will keep his promise of not compromising Clark's secret. As he left to the elevators, he passed none other than Clark and Lois and merely grinned secretly as he went down the elevator and spotted Clark as he read the note. Once he was out of the planet, he headed off to get his things, check out of the hotel and make his way to the nearest airport. He was rather curious about those things and hoped that it was not going to be a bad ride. Just what and who he was going to find in Gotham was still unknown, but he could bet 10 to 1, it was going to a man dressed like a bat and fought like a ninja, if he was lucky, and since he had the luck of the devil as some of his friends and family called it, he had no doubt he was going to meet the Dark Knight, on what set of circumstance though he had no idea. Gotham Airport. A large plane was now making its way to land on the runway at the Gotham City Airport, and just as it was releasing its landing gear, out came a figure holding to one of the tires and soon landed outside of the field near the runway. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze dusted himself off and soon got on his way to get away from the authorities and go see the rest of the city. He was still wearing his usual gear as he hid and quickly changed his looks with hair dye color and henge. He also made sure to check his laptop and UBS drives, and was pleased to see that they were all working nicely. Once that was done, he moved past the airport's field, leapt over the fences, and moved towards the city. Moving into Gotham City in the closing hours of the afternoon was already giving the city something of a gothic look, and he could not help but feel a bit spooked out by it. He had read the files on the city, and while it had its fair share of fun places and things to do, the criminal elements in the city were literally flowing around like water. And a number of the said criminals were all crazy and completely unlike anything he had dealt with back in LA. One such foe was known as the Riddler, who seemed to enjoy making all these wacky but deadly word puzzles that usually drove the people who were his victims. He had no plans on mincing words with a guy like him, since he was in no mood for wasting time on some crazy and lethal scheme. He placed those thoughts aside as he moved into the city. The first thing he did was go to a nearby cafe and decided to grab some food and some drink. As he sat down, he decided to check out the news, which was thankfully being played on a nearby TV set. In the current news today, billionaire Bruce Wayne will be attending a special charity ball for the Gotham City Police Department Veterans Fund. This has been Bruce's second appearance in the ball and has shown his support for the Gotham PD. Naruto looked at this man named Bruce Wayne and he could see that he was all smiles and working hard in front of the camera. He had a feeling that this guy was hiding something, a pain of some sort, but he decided that it was not his business, since despite playing what he suspected was a role, Bruce was very genuine in his actions when he presented an award to the police officers who were there on the stage. For now, however, Naruto's concern was on what else was in the news. And it was not going to be long before the news turned to something that he felt is a lot more important to listen to. In other news today, the criminal known as the Penguin has been transferred once more to Arkham Asylum following his latest attempt to steal a number of priceless relics from a recent excavation in South America what were being stored in the Gotham Museum. The former socialite turned criminal was foiled by Batman and Robin during his attempt, and while it had been a difficult chase, he and his henchmen were apprehended and locked up by the two, as well as preventing damage to the relics. Images of the criminal in question actually made Naruto raise an eyebrow. This guy was nowhere near as freaky as that Akatsuki swordsman named Kisame, or that snake-summoning bastard Orochimaru, and that zombie bounty hunter of Akatsuki who was the victim of his prototype Rasenshuriken decades ago. But this penguin guy certainly looked like the flightless bird he read about in the internet and at the library he at times went to just to keep himself informed, and like the ones he had seen near the land of snow, spring. But unlike said birds that he found to be funny and at times cute, this guy was downright creepy and also looked like someone who not only needed to be on a diet but needed to spend a whole life sentence on a deserted island and away from the populace. There's an idea. Maybe I should to the Hiroshima technique and take all the bad guys to an island way off the map and let them figure out just how they are going to survive. But despite how tempting the idea was, he decided to place it aside for now, since that was no doubt going to be a problem. The methods in which this world dealt with criminals confused him at times, since in his reality, criminals were usually divided into two categories with different punishments. The civilian criminals back in his world were usually dealt in a fashion by the cage and were punished depending on the severity of their crimes. Though that was only in the hidden villages, and those who were not part of the hidden villages were dealt with by those who were placed into positions of power by the feudal lords and by civilian officials. The other category of criminals were the missing nin, who were quickly placed on the bingo book. This book was the source of information on renegade ninja and just what were their crimes and the bounties that were placed on them by the officials. Of course, the bingo book was different for each land, and while there were criminals listed there were also enemy ninjas who had done things to warrant them being placed in the bingo book. And usually ninja who encountered ninjas who were listed in said bingo book would be given the authority to take them down, either for capture or kill. But that was not recommended for ninja who were high-ranked. S-rank ninja in the bingo book were to be engaged with extreme caution. A large number of highly skilled ninja were assembled, or when the ninja pursuing said target was an S-rank ninja as well. Naruto decided not to delve into that any further as he decided to go and finish his food and drink. Once his food was there before him, he went to work and enjoyed his food as best he could. He would have gone for ramen, but this was good enough, and besides, he had no idea if there was a ramen stand anywhere in the city. Hence the need for him to get a map and explore the city soon. He also kept his senses alert on the chance that some nut might decide to try and rob the place. The last thing he wanted was a replay of his time in that place in LA. Thankfully, it seemed that the majority of criminals that called Gotham their home had other ideas or had bigger fish to fry. As soon as he was done and paid his bill, he moved out to find a place to call home, though he had an idea that he was willing to try just to make sure that he did not get into trouble. He decided to find a nice place to call his base of operations and get there to do some work on what he was going to do in Gotham, but he had a feeling that sooner or later, he was going to meet some very interesting people. But before all of that, he needed to get some shut-eye, tour the city a bit, and when he got a map, go out and do some aggressive recon. Not to mention do some shopping to buy some new supplies and equipment with his money that he might be in need of in the future. Back in Metropolis, Clark Kent normally was very calm and level-headed, but today he was a bit tense, or rather more than tense, try impatient. As much as he was relieved that no one on the planet had gotten a tip about his identity, or anyone in the other news and gossip agencies, that did not make him feel any better. The Hokage had pretty much faded away from the scene as he had only made very few appearances in Metropolis before being gone for at least 2 weeks. Perry had been trying to find leads since he was curious as to who this hero was and why was it he was moving about the world when he should be in LA. Clark was happy that his identity was not exposed, but that did not mean that the discovery that someone else apart from his family and Batman, Bruce, knew he was Superman was not easy to deal with. Kara was insistent that they find the Hokage and get some details straight and find out just how he found out his identity. And she had good reasons, but so far, the man was off the radar and not a single sighting of him had been made. Most would have thought that the Hokage had gone back to LA, but there was no sighting of him there either, so that meant that he was still moving around. Where are you, Hokage? Clark was tempted to go to Bruce and see if he had possibly heard of this Hokage, since he knew Bruce would want to keep an eye on matters that were of concern. But he decided against it since there had been no mention of the Hokage in Gotham, and if he was there, Bruce would have informed him, even more so since Bruce would not be the kind to let someone just appear in his city. For now he was busy with his life as Clark Kent and he intended to keep it that way. But the best he could hope for was a chance to learn more about the mysterious Hokage and how he had learned about his true identity. And if possible, hear about any new happenings that can be linked to the blonde masked figure who had deduced his identity. 2 days later, Naruto was in his combat clothing and was now moving over the buildings as he ran over the rooftops of the city. The shinobi could not help but admit that the city was filled to the brim with activity, most of the time the nightlife were the negative kind. But he was keen to see just what the city was going to be like and possibly run into any of the criminals. As he got over another building, he began to run up the nearby wall and got to the top and scanned the city. He looked around his current location and then sat down on the cross-legged position and began to summon the natural energy and found to his slight disgust that the energy here in the city was more than a bit tainted. Industry normally did not bother the natural flow of energy, but the ninja noted that heavily industrialized cities had a tendency to taint the natural energy in and around their area. But he placed that out of the side since now was not the time for him to think about the mess. He was in senjutsu mode in a mere moment and began to scan the chakra signatures in the city. There were a lot of them and it was going to be a bit before he sorted them out, and he decided to get on the move and see just what and possibly who he was going to see. He moved over some of the buildings and soon he spotted the flashing lights that were red and blue, the universal color of the police in his experience. And judging by the number of said lights, this meant that something was going down, and he had a feeling that he might meet Batman or possibly some of the more colorful criminals. He had managed to get a dossier of the criminals that called this Gothic city home, though what Gothic meant he had absolutely no clue. His files on the criminals that called this place home had some very interesting people. One was a man going by the name of Bane. A guy who apparently was one heck of a bodybuilder and had a serious use for a drug called venom. Seeing an image of that guy had him thinking about all the muscle-bound ninja he had fought before, who despite their size, sometimes had some wicked speed. Apparently he was also rather smart, a deadly mix of brawn and brains, though he was supposedly a mercenary assassin. Naruto had little liking for that kind since despite his people being trained as assassins, they only got to that stage if they were contracted to kill someone who was very important or too dangerous, and they usually were allied to the village. Mercenaries were looked down on by a good number of loyal ninjas since they were highly untrustworthy and certainly not someone one worked with unless they had some very steep pockets. Even the samurai in the Land of Iron hated them, and those of their group who did turn rogue and become mercenaries were treated even worse. Still, fighting the guy was going to be promising. The other guy was man who went by the name of Joker. A deranged madman who dressed in the worst getup Naruto had ever seen. Guy who wears makeup, and also clothes of green and purple, as well as acting like a super creepy version of Orochimaru. What kind of sick nut acts like that and dresses like that in public? Still, this guy certainly had brains to mix with the craziness, having held Gotham for ransom more than once and had really given a lot of the police headaches in trying to deal with him. And the way this guy treated his victims filled the former Hokage with a great deal of disgust, and that was something since Naruto usually tried to change people with the marked exception of those who are truly irredeemable. If he was given a chance, he would silence the bastard personally, but for now he was going to let Batman deal with the nut. There were others, but these two were certainly interesting. The first was Selina Kyle, who was a very attractive blonde woman who could easily turn heads and make most men who had little control over themselves drool or think less than gentle thoughts. He, however, could tell that she was not just a luscious figure and a pretty face. She was known as Catwoman, a thief who certainly had the looks to suit the name. She was a woman who advocated the protection of animals, namely cats, and before she had been arrested, had been a high roller in Gotham society and courted by a lot of guys, one of them being said playboy Bruce Wayne. She was apparently caught by Batman, and despite being a thief, she seemed to be willing to fight other criminals, as she had tangled a terrorist group with Batman that eventually led to her being captured by said man. All because she wanted to stop them from taking land that was to be a nature preserve. And while she was released on probation for stopping said terrorists, there was no doubt in Naruto's mind that this was one woman he disliked the idea of being kept locked away. Even if he had only done some preliminary research on her, his time in being a Hokage and his years of experience told him that she was possibly getting frustrated at not being allowed to live the way she wanted to live. And that was something he could relate to, since he had always been placed in a situation where he could not be himself. Still, stealing was stealing and considered to be a crime in this reality as well as his own, though if she stole from corrupt and foolish criminal bosses and high society people, then he was not going to stop her in any way, shape or form. Only when she harmed others who were not even part of the problem would he stop her if he met her. The next person was a certain woman who had one heck of an unhealthy obsession with plants, and had the more than fitted name of Poison Ivy. The woman was named Dr. Pamela Isley and was rumored to have been one heck of a botanist in her day and cared a great deal for nature. She apparently had been involved in some form of accident that somehow gave her the ability to command plants, release some form of pheromone that could arouse people and create poisons of a sort in her own body. The one thing that he did not like was said accident supposedly made her unable to have kids, which as far as he knew was a fate most women would have considered worse than death. Still, the woman was undeniably attractive, especially with that getup she usually wore when she did her work. Now that is one heck of a killer babe with a green thumb. Poison Ivy had more than her fair shares of being stopped by Batman and had been locked up in a place called Arkham Asylum. This place was some sort of hospital and holding center for the criminally insane and dangerous. In his mind, the nuts he dealt with would have felt right at home there, Toby and Kabuto included. The difference was with this green-loving babe was the fact that unlike the other loons and scum, she had no interest in money and usually did her actions to attack people who had committed actions that were attacks on nature, at least to her perspective. And when the word attack was used, that included using lethal force, either with her poisons or her pet plants. She was also rumored to be friends with one criminal woman going by the name of Harley Quinn. But so far he had no idea who she was at the moment, so that was going to be placed aside for the time being as he saw that there was some activity at the other side of the city. He spotted a figure moving through the shadows, and since Batman was recorded to have a cape, this was not Batman as he did not see a cape. He moved quickly and quietly as best he could while keeping to the shadows to make sure that he did not alert his quarry. Once he was close enough, he spotted the figure break into a nearby tower which looked like it belonged to some very rich fellow. And when he managed to get a glimpse of his target once the figure came back out, he could not help but grin behind his mask. Hello. At said tower. Selina sighed as she took the jewels and placed in her sachet. She had half expected Batman to show up again to stop her, but with Bane causing havoc alongside Riddler as she had heard on the police band wave, the chances of that happening were slim. And despite the fact she knew that she was skirting the limits of her probation from being Catwoman, this was one chance she was not going to let go. Besides, the necklace belonged to a businessman who she knew made his money over the trade of tiger skins, so double impact for her. The beautiful cat burglar patted the bag and spoke with a measure of relief as she knew that she was in the clear. Looks like I'm finally getting away scot-free tonight. That was when another voice came on the scene behind Selina. You might want to rethink that statement, miss. Catwoman turned and there behind her was a man dressed in an outfit of orange and black, like a ninja, and wearing a black short-sleeved trench coat with red flames on it. The guy wore a mask and some form of headband with a metal plate on the front and had a strange leaf-like symbol on it. She raised an eyebrow since the man was actually standing on a nearby pole, upside down. And she could tell that there was nothing holding him on said pole, which made her all the more curious. And while she knew the saying, curiosity killed the cat, she knew cats had 9 lives as a saying too. Naruto grinned again behind his mask as he got a very good look at Selena Kyle and spoke once more. Considering the getup you have, I can wager a safe bet you're Catwoman. And I can easily say the name does you justice. Selena was curious who this guy was, as this was definitely not Batman, and most certainly not Robin or that one named Nightwing, and decided to speak next. And who are you? I'm the Hokage, and before you ask why I am here, I'm taking a tour of the city, just to see what this place is like. And as far as I can see, the nightlife is pretty exciting, and despite the fact I am upside down, the view before me is certainly nice. Selena could easily see this guy was actually flirting with her, a surprise since that did not happen often. Usually it was her who did the flirting. Though only to distract people such as Batman when she felt it was better to flee than stay. She decided to smile back and watch as the man moved away from the pole, walking on it and then moving to flip and land on the ledge like a skilled acrobat. That made Selena raise an eyebrow, as that was rather interesting and, despite herself, somewhat impressive. Are you flirting with me, Hokage? I thought heroes like you usually waste no time catching crooks like me. Naruto mentally snickered at that and replied. That's true, and I do plan to try and convince you to give those jewels back, but that does not mean I can't enjoy the company, right? Selena raised an eyebrow at this guy. He was actually flirting with her, and maybe that could be his weakness. If he was easily attracted to her, then she might be able to play him. She smiled and beckoned to him with a finger. Naruto decided to do it, and as he was close, she spoke to him, while reaching for her whip. Sure, but you should know something about cats, Hokage. And what is that? We have sharp claws. Selena slashed at Naruto, and Naruto reeled back as she then attacked him with several attacks, managing to hit his mask and crack it, forcing him back until he moved away that she felt the distance would do, and she quickly moved with her whip and left the scene. She moved as quickly as she can, unaware that Naruto was not dissuaded, but he merely grinned and soon reached for a special kunai of his. As soon as she had some distance from the man on a rooftop and was near a tall wall on said roof, she looked back and saw that he was not following her. She sighed and spoke to herself. He's not bad looking body-wise, but he's no Batman and did not even try to catch me. But she got a surprise when she turned and was face to face with Naruto, who quickly moved forward until she hit the wall behind her and the mask fell off, revealing his face. Selena saw herself looking at a young but definitely handsome looking blonde with blue eyes that had a lupine quality. There were several whisker-like marks on his cheeks that added to the look, and his toothy grin revealed slightly sharper than normal canines. That made her feel some surprise, as she had not expected that, and despite the fact that his face was revealed, the Hokage did not seem to be troubled at all. Naruto then spoke to her. Nice try, little cat, but I also go by another name, and that is Fox, and foxes like me are very cunning and we're damn persistent when we chase something. So, are we going to the part where we fight for real, or where you give up the jewels, or you can try another way of making me lower my guard and get away with said jewels? All three sound really nice to me, though the third option might be more fun. Naruto then sniffed a bit and grinned more as he spoke. Nice perfume, by the way, certainly suits you, even more so with the sweat mixed in, Catwoman, so what's it going to be? That sent shivers up Selena's spine, even though she could not know why, or she thought she did, as this was the first time a man was this aggressive with her when it came flirting, as Batman was the impassive type. But she was not going to let this chance to escape again slip. How this guy managed to get past her and be there was a mystery, but that had to wait. She gave him a grin and spoke once more while moving to press her hands on his chest. You're pretty good there, Hokage, but aren't you worried that I know what you look like without your mask? Naruto did not seem fazed by that and replied. Don't think I don't know your real name, Catwoman, or better yet, Miss Selena Kyle. I might look like a kid, but I assure you, I am no simple idiot. Besides, all it takes is for you to be revealed to have gone back to being Catwoman, and they lock you away for a long time and throw away the key. So, how are we going to play this? Selena managed to smile, yet she was not the least bit happy that she had been found out by this guy. Everyone who was in the know already knew that she was Catwoman, but she was still hoping to do this to live the way she wanted to live without anyone figuring out. But this guy had just caught her, and now she was in trouble, unless she could convince him to let her go and forget that they ever met. You tell me, Hokage, you certainly know who I am, so you have me at a disadvantage. She ran her hand on his chest and then moved to his face, which despite her self-control, she found to be well formed and hardened, like Batman's, and she could not help but reach for the face as well. The marks on his cheeks made her wonder if it was merely tattoos or these were possibly inherited. Naruto grinned even more as Selena was doing her best to lay on the charm, and she was really going for it as it was. But he was already making his move while Selena was laying on the charm, and decided to let this little cat and mouse, or rather cat and fox game come to an end, but not before seeing just how far he could take it. I know, so tell you what, why don't we try a competition? Oh. Yep, here's how it's going to be. You try to rob a different place in 3 days without getting caught by Batman and the cops, but avoid me finding you. If I find you, try to evade me quickly and get to Pier number 19 in Gotham Harbor and avoid having me switch your loot with something else harmless but worthless to you while you try to fight or evade me. If you can do 3 times in a row, then you win and I will not bother you again, nor will I stop you from what you love doing. Selina raised an eyebrow at that and replied. Really? Care to tell me why, Hokage? Naruto grinned, and then to Selina's slight shock, the man touched her lips and her chin with his fingers and spoke with a very husky tone into her right ear. Way I see it, Miss Kyle, you're not a full-time villain. You don't kill, sell drugs, weapons, or people, kidnap and all those other things criminals do. You only rob people, and that usually pertains to corrupt, petty people who do something that offends you, and even if you do rob them, you don't kill unless you have no choice. And you also happen to have a kindness towards animals if what I read about you is right on the money when it concerns wildlife, namely cats. Plus you did save this city from a terrorist attack, and that wins points in my book. The only time I might take offense to your passion for being the seductive thief that you are, is when you rob the hard-working, industrious, and actually respectable people in this city. You live your life the way you want. You want freedom and the chance to be yourself. I can respect that easily, since I want to have freedom too in my own way and not be forced by others to live the way they want me to live. In that sense, you can say that in some fashion, you and I are a bit similar, though I am no thief like you. If you want to keep doing this without being found out, try to keep up with me here, Catwoman. Selina had to admit that this was the first time she met someone who understood her lifestyle and her wants. However, she was still going to be very wary of him, since she knew that going in without seeing all the angles was a bad idea from the beginning. And if you win, what then? Naruto then grabbed her by the hips with one hand, much to her surprise, though she hid it well, and spoke once more as he touched her chin again with the other. If I win the first day, then I get to see your face. Sure, I've seen the pictures, but images don't do justice to seeing the face in the flesh, so to speak. Besides, it's only fair since you've seen my face already. And what happens on the second day if you win, Hokage? Naruto enjoyed that as he rubbed his left hand on her hip slowly before speaking. Simple. I ask you out on a date, and I'm paying. That made Selina raise an eyebrow, as that was something she did not expect. You want to ask me out on a date? Of course, a date, a simple lunch and dinner date, and I am paying this time with my own money. There's nothing in your files that say you can't have a social life, right? And no, I am not going to take you to bed or anything like that. I just want to know you and why you chose this life. Since we're both in this case on opposing sides of a spectrum, I am just curious. And besides, I happen to have a high respect for women, so the only time I would take you to bed is if you allow me to, and only if you and I have enough time to know one another. You can always go home afterwards and I won't stalk you, just a willing man and woman on a social get-together. And the last day. Naruto laughed a bit and switched places with Selina as he was now on the wall, but this time he had both hands on his hips and moved them to her back. That made Selina take in a brief gasp of air as she looked at the man who was flirting with her in a very aggressive fashion. That's when I asked you to pose for a few pictures. That got Selina's attention, and in a not so good way, as she looked at him hard and with a frown on her face. What did you say? Naruto laughed gently and replied. Not in that way, though a guy can certainly dream about it. No, just some pictures in a set of clothes that you can feel comfortable with. Knowing your social standing before you got busted as Catwoman by a certain tall, dark, and brooding dude with a rather creepy attachment to flying mammals, you're bound to have a few dresses here and there. I would be lying though if I said that I don't like to see you in a swimsuit, 1 or 2 pieces up to you, though I recommend black since you would obviously look good in it. After that, I will pretty much leave you alone for the rest of the time I am here in Gotham, which might not be for very long anyway. And if I refuse, then you reveal to them that I was being Catwoman again, right? Pretty much. So, balls in your court, Catwoman. Selina decided to make her move as she smiled at the Hokage and moved to kiss him as she spoke to his lips while running her hands on his body again. You drive a hard game, but tell me, do you really think that you can win this competition? I caught you off guard, didn't I? Perhaps, but a cat always manages to escape, and this time, so will I. With that, she quickly pushed him back and took out a small number of smoke pellets and tossed it at Naruto. The smoke was blinding, but she quickly turned away and escaped. Or so she thought, as when she left the building, Naruto merely blew the smoke away with a blast of chakra-enhanced wind and moved to see Catwoman on the move yet again, but enjoyed the sight of her retreating form and whistled appreciatively at the view before turning around. He was going to let her go for now. After all, this was merely the foreplay and he had something to return as well. Later. Selina sighed a bit as she looked around, hoping that it was all over and she could finally get away with her prize. That Hokage guy, however, did not make it the least bit easy for her, as that was certainly something she had not readied herself for. The guy was both aggressive and rather forward, as he had actually responded with placing his hands on her hips and even had the audacity to touch her back. Plus that competition he had in mind. Get a grip, Selena. Time to go. You've got the jewels, so. The blonde thief was shocked when she checked her sachet and found that instead of the jewels she took, there was a stuffed frog doll in her pack and it had a letter in the chest. She took it off and saw that it was a message. Nice try, but better luck next time. And just so you know, this was a dry run. The real competition starts next week, or in this case, at least 4 days from now, so better shape up and get the rust of your joints okay. Because you are about to get a heck of a workout. P.S. I'm sending the jewels back, and I will alert security this time, so feel free to come and get them if you want. Hero. Selena turned and shook her head in slight anger and slight amusement, all this time when she thought she finally had the advantage. That kid had actually switched the jewels with this plush toy and she had thought that her actions had finally worked in letting her get away. But instead she was the one who got robbed, and despite her anger at what happened, she had to give the young man credit for the slip. She turned to see that there was no sign of the Hokage anywhere, meaning that he had escaped, and that meant that the competition was on between them. I am so not going to lose to you, young man. A day later. Naruto cracked a grin as he read the latest bit of news. Apparently the reason Batman was not around to catch Catwoman was he was dealing with Bane and Riddler. How those two managed to get themselves working together, he would never know, but he did not mind, and while Kurama had expressed a level of interest in fighting this Bane character, he turned down that idea. The thought of breaking into Arkham and being around all those loons and nutjobs just to find one supped-up criminal and fight him for the entertainment value, was not in his mind right now. At the moment, he was currently on his way to grab some takeout food from where he was staying. The chance to bring a good meal into his guts was welcome, but he was annoyed by the fact that he could not find a decent ramen restaurant anywhere. The Gothamites, as they were called, seemed to be fairly interesting in his mind, and he was pleased to see that despite the fact that their city did not have a very stellar reputation due to the crime rates, they were proud of their home. Kurama, however, had a less than stellar liking for the city as he spoke. This place is one of the strangest cities thus far. I suppose so. Anyway, we should get ready for another interesting night. Hope we can run into more company in the city. HMPH, I hope that we can finally see just what this Batman is capable of. Anyway, are you sure that you did the right thing in letting that very attractive woman go like that last night? You mean Selena Kyle, right? Yeah, I mean seriously, Naruto. She was fine, and certainly looks good in the clothes, not like the women in your past, but certainly comes close. For all you know, both of you could have made quite a set, not to mention the fact that she would have been one heck of a lady in the sack. I swear you sound like the pervy sage. And that's supposed to be a bad thing. Considering the fact that you yourself are quite the pervert and don't bother denying it because we both know it's true. Besides, if you decide to go for it, your experiences when it comes to the bedroom might really make her happy. She might very well join you willingly since you don't happen to be so uptight with the law and all. Ha. Yeah, well, no sense crying over spilled milk, as they say. Besides, we've got another week before we leave this place. And besides, that encounter is going to give me a lot of data to make the next novel. Kurama snorted a bit and replied before going to sleep. Yeah, well, novels and books don't come close to doing the real thing with a woman, or more than one woman, as you already know. Naruto could not help but agree to the truth in Kurama's words. Nothing beat actually doing with it a willing woman, or in his case, more than one willing woman. Then again, even after being married, his former sensei Kakashi never got rid of the books, and Ayame certainly didn't mind. He was willing to wager a guess that Kakashi used the books that Jiraiya made to spice up his love life with Ayame. The blonde placed the thoughts aside as he ate his food and then headed back to his hideout to get some work done. The blonde shinobi was more than willing to get a chance to meet any other new figures in Gotham, though he was hoping to see if he was going to meet Batman and his crew to see just what this guy was about. Once he got to the hideout, he began to work and also plan something on the off chance he was discovered. Later that night, Naruto was currently using his Senjutsu chakra once more as he was on the highest tower in Gotham while balancing himself on a thin sheet of marble on the tip of the tower. This allowed him to scan the city section by section since that was needed due to the nature of the flow of natural energy in the place. He was looking forward to the chance to have that competition with Selena Kyle since she was good and a test of skill was something he did look forward to. Of course, Kurama had other ideas at the time and he could not help but shake his head at some of the suggestions his demonic resident and still slightly reluctant partner had towards the woman. It would have been a lie though that he did not find those same suggestions very interesting, and he had to keep those from conjuring perverted ideas into his head. But for now, he was going to indulge them at a later date since he now had to go and see if he could find out what was going on in the city. He soon got up and fired a chakra chain to move to the next building below, and as soon as he swung away, he headed from building to building. That was when he spotted someone, or rather 3 people, moving over the rooftops. That piqued Naruto's interest as he began to move in the shadows while making sure to keep the 3 on sight. He moved close enough to finally see them and he grinned. Well now, If it isn't the Batman himself, certainly looks the part and the name, and that must be his accomplices. He moved ever closer to see both Robin and Batgirl. He had read the data that he could find and knew that both Robin and Batgirl were accomplished fighters and were part of the team. Though there was another named Nightwing, he had not seen that guy as of yet but decided to shelve that thought aside for now as he kept watch on the three. All the while making sure to be silent and still, not an easy thing for him considering his personality, but he had learned enough to get by. So far Batman did not react, and when he used his senjutsu senses, he could tell that they had not found him yet. Once they were clear, the blonde shinobi followed them as they reached a warehouse which appeared to be occupied. He wagered a guess that the people who were there were not the law-abiding kind. And as he moved through the shadows behind Batman and his group, he was able to see them in action. He saw how Batman fought, and the taijutsu stance that the man was using was more than enough to tell him that Batman was well trained. The way the guy moved spoke of intense training and discipline as well as years of experience. He did not try to just power through a foe. He was intelligent, patient, cunning, and also agile despite the build the guy had. Naruto nodded in approval as Batman continued to fight several of the crooks attacking him as he switched his attention to the others. Robin appeared to be less disciplined yet was unpredictable in his attack style, so that told Naruto that the young man had some street fighting background to him, though tempered no doubt by his boss's training methods and tactics. But Naruto did notice that the guy was a bit too overzealous and a bit too forceful as well in his attacks. The guy could recover well enough, but that action still left him vulnerable to counterattack as one of the thugs managed to get close enough to grab him in a bear hug from behind. Robin managed to free himself and knock the guy down, but Naruto could tell that he was still going to be needing improvement. As for Batgirl, Naruto had to give her credit for the look as well as her fighting skills. Apparently she had been trained well in taijutsu and no doubt had prior training in self-defense before being the costumed fighter that she was. And considering the way the various criminal elements that called this city home, he was hardly surprised by the fact that she had to defend herself on a regular basis. He watched them fight the thugs and he could tell that they were more than experienced in fighting side by side and alone, though he could guess that Batman was the more seasoned of the whole group, being the senior. In this case, Batman was like a Jonin and the two were either Genin or Chunin had they been born in his world. It was there and then that he sensed something was about to happen and he decided that now was the time to go in and make a move of his own. Barbara was not going to like this as she managed to knock down the thug while fighting alongside Batman and Robin, who were also dealing with their own foes. The smuggling ring they had busted up happened to be well armed, and while some of them had been taken out by her and the others, the rest were putting up a heck of a fight. Unknown to her, however, one of the thugs had snuck up to a crane that was carrying a number of crates and then cut at the net with a knife. Robin spotted him and quickly tossed one of his Robin-themed boomerangs at the man. It was enough to knock the guy out, but the now weakened net tore up and down came the crates. Batman saw the two and shouted to Barbara. "Batgirl, move." Barbara looked up and her eyes widened at the sight as she saw the crates coming down. She tried to move, but the shock had temporarily stopped her from reaching for her grappling gun or to move away. However, she was not going to be lost under the crates or killed as a certain someone made his very own move to help her from her predicament. The last thing she saw was large amount of smoke, and then she was being held bridal style in someone's arms. She looked to see herself looking at a face covered by a mask that had a fox-like appearance and a metal plate on the forehead area with a strange leaf-like symbol in the metal. Barbara was quite shocked by this and heard the massive crash. Turned into her surprise, she was at least 3 stories up where the crates could have crushed her into nothing but pulp. She looked back at the figure and managed to find her voice and spoke. Thanks. No problem, miss, hold on. That was her only warning as the guy leapt from the beams and began to move down, and as soon as they landed, another thug charged, but the new arrival quickly reacted by leaping forward with her still in his arms, and smashed a kick into the face, sending the guy down and placing her to the floor. He then turned and to her surprise took out what appeared to be ninja throwing stars and tossed them at the next attacker, who was armed with a pipe. That managed to stop him and pin him to the wall. Another attacker came and she turned to fight back, only for the masked being to move and block the incoming crowbar with what appeared to be some sort of diamond-shaped metallic knife. She then saw it actually shimmer a bit and the crowbar was suddenly cut as her rescuer then unleashed a powerful side kick that sent the man flying to the side. And right into a number of crates, showing that this fellow with the fox mask was a lot stronger than he actually looked. All of that was in a span of a few seconds as well, and it was not long before the smuggler thugs were down and out. It was here that Batman was accompanied by Robin and was now before the masked ninja. Barbara was soon moving to the side and was with Batman and Robin. Naruto could already see that he was now being assessed by Batman. This guy was very good, and after what he had seen, he could easily tell that Batman had been trained extensively in taijutsu and ninjutsu, though he doubted that this world's version ninjas had the same level of ability as the ninjas of his world. He also had no doubt that Batman was going to come in hard on him and try to get some answers out of him when he saw a chance. And he was right as Batman spoke. "You're the Hokage." Naruto tried to lighten the mood, though he had a feeling that the guy in black was not going to rise to the bait, as it were. "Good guess, Batman. Shame I can't give you a reward for the guess. You willing to take an IOU? Robin and Batgirl were surprised by the way the guy was talking to Bruce. It was as if he was not bothered by the fact that Bruce was giving him the third degree. Bruce himself was not amused and sternly glared at the man before him. Still, he noted that despite the attitude, the Hokage was also watching him intently. The body language did not give anything away, and that alone was telling to him, as the only way someone could do that was when the person was very well trained and experienced. Whoever this Hokage was, there was no doubt in Bruce's mind that he was someone who merely dressed up as a ninja. And the way he used the ninja stars and that knife told Bruce that this guy was a veteran fighter with some serious strength and stamina. But right now, he was in the mood to get some answers. What are you doing here in Gotham? Just passing through. I ain't here to steal your thunder or that of your running partners. I was just cruising along the area when I saw what was going down, and decided to observe the whole thing. Only decided to get involved with the whole thing when your lady partner was about to be turned into a mess on the floor. That got Bruce's attention as that meant that the whole time he, Barbara, and Tim were fighting, this guy had been watching them. He had trained himself to have a very high level of situational awareness, and his years of training and experience only made it stronger. To know that this guy had been here the whole time and had not gotten his attention was enough to tell him that this guy was very well trained and possibly experienced to a level that was above normal. Whoever trained him was good. But that still does not mean that I am going to let him go scot-free. Really. I saw the news when you showed up in LA and then in Metropolis, and I can tell that you are no ordinary person. Naruto decided to try an experiment and spoke seriously in Japanese. He had a feeling that if Batman had been trained by a ninja master, then knowing the language was going to be second nature to him. You have no idea how different I am, Batman, but I can bet that as you were trained by a ninja master, you already guessed that, didn't you? And sure enough, Batman did not disappoint Naruto as he responded in Japanese. It didn't. The way you fought and moved tell me you are no mere kid. You were trained not by some simple martial artist, but a top-ranked assassin, and no doubt you had other teachers as well. You also showed that you have strong combat experience and reflexes. Only way you could earn that level of skill is not just through training alone, but by being placed in situations that demanded skill and innovation. And because of that, I can bet that you have been doing those things for years until you can do it without conscious thought. Naruto grinned at that and replied. Good, you're every bit as skilled as I read in the news, Batman, and I can tell that you trained your two companions personally, though I can bet that they still have a long way to go to reach your level. Your master was no doubt a very good man and someone you respected a great deal and was a good influence to you. Now the question in my mind is what you are going to do now with me. It should be obvious that I have to make sure that you are not a threat in disguise. I don't trust you one bit, Hokage. You really need to loosen up, Yano. Considering what you know about me already, do you really think that I am going to go with you quietly? I ain't got any issue with you, but if you want to try and stop me, you're welcome to try. Barbara and Tim looked at the two in utter annoyance and confusion since none of them had taken a Japanese language course for different reasons and thus they were not able to understand the conversation. But it was obvious to the two that both the Hokage and Batman were studying each other very carefully, no doubt waiting for them to make one move that could change the whole situation in a heartbeat. That was when Barbara spoke. Hey, not to butt in or anything, but how is it you got to me so fast and get me away from the crates? Naruto grinned and moved over to the crates and moved some away, showing some of his strength, and to the surprise of the heroes, where Barbara was before, was a battered and cracked log. The blonde then replied to the question of the redhead as he knew that she was in need of an explanation. I used a special jutsu to get you out of the way. It was a basic move that is basically thought to all ninja, and quite possibly familiar to your tall, dark, and brooding boss over there. I switched this log for you and got you out of the way and you were there in my arms. I would have to be a seriously stupid dolt to let a very strong and nice-looking lady being reduced into a pancake. Barbara could not help but raise an eyebrow as she could sense that the guy was flirting with her, and that was a bit surprising as the only one who did that was Dick. The former Robin, now Nightwing, was currently setting up shop outside of Gotham, and while they were still on very good terms with one another, it was a bit of a strain between their relationship that they were apart. Okay. So what do you do with you? Well, way I see it, you three can either let me go since we're pretty much on the same side. Or you both can do things your boss's way since he plans to take me away for questioning since he apparently has major trust issues towards the new people. Tim and Barbara looked at Bruce and he nodded. We can't be too sure about his intentions or who he is. Barbara and Tim knew that Bruce did have a point and looked to face Naruto, who was already working on how to get away before the situation went down south. The two looked at him and Batman was already getting ready on the off chance that Naruto did something. Naruto did something all right, but not in the way that the three expected as he moved at amazing speed and yanked out his swords and jammed them into the ground. As he did so, he channeled his wind chakra and shouted out. Fuuton. Rasen K's. The attack unleashed a sphere of pure wind that catches the three off guard as they were suddenly blasted by wind forces that were Category 3 in strength. That forced them back a fair distance to the point they had to use their grappling ropes to hold on the supports. The dust and debris blinded them as Naruto finally spoke. Sorry about that, but there's no freaking way that I am going to let myself get caught by anyone just yet. Bye. Naruto then aimed upward as he placed his swords away. The three only saw a glowing chain suddenly lash up and soon the man left the area as the wind died down. As soon as things seemed to calm down a bit more, they got away from where they all had anchored themselves and soon moved to find any trace of the Hokage. But they were not able to find any trace of the man now. Batman wiped his eyes a bit and looked at the place where Naruto had been and knew that they were going to be in for a very interesting time. It was here that the police came in and that was the signal for him, Tim, and Barbara to move out of the area and get away from the regular police. They soon met with Commissioner Gordon, who was surprised to find out that someone else had come in on the scene, and from Batman's description and that of Robin and Batgirl, he was quick to guess just who it was. The Hokage is here. Yes, but we lost sight of him, so I believe it would be best we be watchful then. He's not exactly the kind of person who one can ignore without good reason. Batman talked with Gordon more and soon they were off to the Batcave, as he had a lot to talk about with the two. The way that Hokage fought was more than convincing to Batman that he was no simple kid and was possibly a lot older than he looked. His memories of his encounters with Talia's father Raz Aegal told him that if there is something odd about someone, it usually was not too good. Once they got there, Tim took off his mask and spoke in a serious tone, though with some annoyance, as he rubbed his back from the sudden attack of wind. Man, what the heck was that he used on us? I felt like I got caught in a twister all of a sudden. Barbara nodded in agreement as she spoke next. Same here. Could he have some sort of alien, like Kara and Clark, or is he a metahuman with wind manipulation powers? Bruce took off his cowl and shook his head a bit. No, as far as records show, most if not all metahumans don't have to do those things like jamming swords into the ground. I doubt that move was for show. And if he was a metahuman, then he would have to be very well trained at that. Government trained and sanctioned maybe. Bruce shook his head at Tim's suggestion, as despite the way things looked, the government would not allow that, plus the fact that the man spoke Japanese with some strange accent told him that the US government was not part of it. Plus everything about the Hokage screamed ninja training, though the choice of orange in his ensemble as well as red made Bruce even more curious. I doubt it, the government does not have a hand in this, besides that, the weapons he carried were well made, with these being different. They don't sell this in novelty stores after all, these look better made and possibly handcrafted as well as sharpened. Bruce referred to the shuriken they recovered earlier as he took them for the dusting of prints. He needed to know if this guy was recorded in the national and international database and soon. But he was surprised to find that there were no fingerprints, meaning that he was not going to get anywhere in that avenue. After some time in figuring out his plans on how to deal with the Hokage, he spent some time putting Barbara and Tim through some simulations, much to their chagrin. Thankfully it was not too long as he gave them the chance to unwind and get some much-needed sleep. Tim was quick to head up and chat with Alfred and get some food and drink before getting some shut-eye, while Barbara did the same before she would head home. After all, she did have a life outside of being Batgirl. Bruce checked the news and saw that as clockwork, word of the Hokage's arrival was released to the public of Gotham, and the rest of the world. There was no doubt in his mind that Clark was going to soon pay him a visit. After all, he had encountered the Hokage already, so some input from the Kryptonian was a must if they were going to solve the mystery on who the Hokage was and what were his plans and intentions. As for Naruto, he was currently getting himself ready for the chance to finally cross paths with Selena and possibly have some fun while he was here. He made sure, however, to get as much shut-eye as he could and also update his work, as he had gotten an email from his editor that there were increasing demands for more of his work. Once that was out of the way, after several hours, the blonde decided to go and grab some much-needed shut-eye for what was to come to him. In Wayne Manor the next day, Bruce was currently awake and doing the usual routine of running the company and making the calls. It was here that he was waiting for someone to show up, someone he had called to come to Gotham for a very important purpose. And it was not long before Alfred appeared and spoke to the billionaire. Master Bruce, Mr. Clark Kent has arrived. Bruce nodded as Clark appeared as the Kryptonian then spoke to the butler. Thanks, Alfred. Think nothing of it, Mr. Kent. Would you like some tea and breakfast? You must be tired from the trip. Clark smiled at the butler as he respected Alfred. After all, even though he did not pry into Bruce's life, he could easily tell that Alfred was more than an employed manservant. He placed that aside for the time being as he spoke to Alfred. Sure, some tea and simple crackers would be nice. Of course. As Alfred left the room, both heroes spoke to one another, with Clark speaking first to Bruce. I heard that the Hokage was here and I was able to tell Perry about it, so he sent me here to try and get some news on him. That's the official reason, I take it. Yeah, the real reason is that he knows who I am, Bruce. That got the attention of the billionaire crime fighter as he knew that Clark was very capable of hiding his identity for years since he came to Metropolis. No one who he did not trust and were close to him knew of his dual identity as Superman. But now this unknown hero who had some very strange abilities had actually found Clark out. That was a surprising thought, and as much as he did not want to admit it, Bruce was a bit worried. If the Hokage figured that Clark was Superman, there was a chance that he might figure out that he and Batman were one in the same. How exactly did that happen? I have no idea. All I know is that he was able to find out about me only hours after we met. I get the feeling he must have been tracking me for a while, though how he did it without alerting me is shocking. Bruce thought over what he had experienced with the Hokage personally and replied. Not as shocking as you might think. Me, Tim, and Barbara encountered him last night, and I can tell that despite his teenage form, he's a lot more skilled than he looks. The fact was that he had been observing us the whole time we were dealing with a smuggling ring, and the only time we found him was when he chose to reveal himself. That tells me that whoever trained him was a top-notch assassin, since there's no denying that his skills are like that of a ninja. Possibly he must also have a very high level of control over his body to have been able to avoid your senses, and he possibly had other trainers as well. Both men thought things over as Clark spoke. What else did you find out? Bruce took out one of the recovered shuriken and replied. We recovered this weapon of his from the warehouse when he managed to evade us before I could tag him. This is a traditional ninja shuriken and it's very well made, good quality steel and specially sharpened for balance and flight, along with cutting power. This tells me that he did not buy this in some novelty store, he possibly had this custom made, or forged and sharpened this himself. This shuriken is quality work, similar to the same shuriken used by an old foe of mine, so there's no doubt he was very well trained. Clark took the weapon and could see that Bruce was right. He might not know ninjas all that well, but there was no denying that the weapons was very well made. Bruce then spoke to Clark as he recalled that strange but unique ability the man possessed. He also had the ability to manipulate wind to a degree. We were about to capture him when he used some form of weather manipulation to send me and the others back from him. He's a meta-human. That's possible, but we'll leave that for now. If you plan to find out what you can of him, this is the best time for it. If what he did in Metropolis is any indication, he will not be here for long in Gotham. Clark nodded as he decided to take his time and find a chance to finally speak to the blonde Hokage and figure out just how he had found him out. He had no plans to fight the young man since technically he was not an enemy, but he doubted that Bruce was going to make things that simple or straightforward. The next night, Naruto was busy tracking down some band of crooks just to see how far they were going to go, and he was not the least bit tired yet. He noted something odd about these guys, and that was that while they were acting like regular robbers, what they stole was certainly not regular stuff. A large amount of chemicals and plants, if one can believe that, which was enough to tell him that these guys were not your regular thieves. He had spent the morning working on his novel series and also his manga, and that took most of the morning and afternoon, but as night fell, he decided to go outside and see what was there to do and who he was going to meet. As he watched the thieves move about, he was quite surprised to find them moving into the sewers, and he growled at that. Great. This is one of the times I wished I did not have a nose. That's nothing compared to the view I have to contend with in that old sewer you called your mind. At least you took a different approach, even if I am still in the cage. We're partners, remember, Kurama. Now we're going in. Who knows, this might get interesting. Right. Naruto followed the thieves, and as he did so, he also made sure to be thankful that his mask managed to at least guard him from some of the smell. How the people could tolerate these things he would never know, but he was not going to waste time arguing as he began to think to himself on what was it these guys were only robbing plants and chemicals. He got his answer as he suddenly spotted them going out of the sewers to go into another one where a massive factory was. And he could see that the factory in question was releasing a fairly bad amount of chemicals into the nearby water. He shook his head and moved after the thieves carefully and once more entered the sewers, much to his disgust, and soon he found them. Only to find them down on the ground and dead, and he saw the marks on their lips that was the sign of poison. That made him raise his eyebrows, and he used his senjutsu again to sense the energy around him, even though it was not easy. He felt a chakra signature and sensed one that felt like a fusion of some sort, similar to him when he tapped into nature energy, though there was a plant-like feel to it as well. That was more than enough to tell him that he was dealing with poison ivy this time around. He sighed mentally and headed off to track her down and stop her. He had no idea who owned this place, but considering what he had seen thus far, it was clear to him just what Ivy had in mind for the people who worked in the factory. He, however, could not help but mentally whistle at the sight of the woman, as images of the woman did not do her justice. One thing was sure, the femme fatale tag that was given to her was well deserved, especially considering her ability to kill with a touch or kiss when she wanted to do so. He got closer and also could see that she was carrying a container of sorts, enough to make him guess that she was soon going to make her move on her foes, and now he was going to make his move. What the heck are you doing here? Oh, This is new. I was expecting Batman and his little posse to deal with me this time around, but I had been keeping myself under the radar the whole time. Now it seems that I have a new visitor. The woman turned and saw the Hokage, and Naruto had to raise his eyebrow a bit behind his mask as the woman spoke once more. You are certainly not Batman, nor Robin, nor Nightwing as the older one calls himself now. And before you say anything, I know who you are, Hokage. Have you now? Well, you can bet that I am not going to let you do what you like. Poison Ivy smirked and replied. I guessed that, but apparently you are not very familiar with who I am or what I can do. Now let's see how you deal with my babies. Naruto knew what that meant as he did read her profile, but decided to play the naive guy first, as he had an idea on playing some tricks on the woman. That was why he allowed himself to be restrained by the vines that came out of the ground nearby. Poison Ivy smiled a bit as she walked over to the restrained Hokage and enjoyed the chance to finally have someone else in her clutches for a change of pace. She was expecting Batman to try and stop her from using her special seeds to attack the water supply of a factory that was poisoning the waters near a plot of land that she felt would be a great site for some wild plants that were very rare in her mind. But instead of the Dark Knight, it was this guy who apparently was not all that familiar with her powers and abilities. Such a shame. The Hokage tried to free himself from her vines as she decided to end him once and for all. She reached for his face, and with him being affected by her neural toxin, she was able to remove his mask. The man was rather handsome, young-looking, and she had to admit that the whisker marks on his face made him have a feral look. The guy looked at her with deep blue eyes that also seemed to have a strange but attractive quality in them, so she had to admit that killing someone like him was a waste, but she was not going to be dissuaded in her mission by anyone. The guy struggled and she held him by the face and spoke seductively. You should not struggle so much. Take heart in the fact that your last kiss in this life is coming from me, and for you, I will make your death slow. The young man glared and she kissed him and allowed her poison to flow into him. She felt his struggles begin to slacken, and when she moved back, the guy looked at her and she saw his eyes glow in defiance and soon faded away as his head dropped to his chest. She sighed and spoke to herself. Shame you had to die handsome, but I have my mission. You can release him, my darlings. The vines did what she asked and she walked off to do her work, but she was about to discover something about her foe that was totally unexpected. She then heard his voice again, and that stopped her right in her tracks in utter shock. Not a bad kiss, Ivy-chan, but I think that you are using too simple a kissing technique. Have you considered trying a French kiss instead of just pressing your lips? That might work a lot better than you think. Pamela turned around and was shocked to see the man she had kissed and see drop dead was now standing up there before her alive, and grinning in a very amused fashion as he moved closer to her. She thought of using her crossbow, but before she could do that, there was a loud screech of metal and she looked at her weapon and found out that the triggering mechanism was destroyed by a large metallic needle. She tried to use her fist, but when she tried to slug him, he moved very fast and literally faded from view. What the? Not even Batman is that fast. Nice try, Ivy-chan, but you need to move faster than that. I only allowed your plants to catch me to have an idea of your skills, and while you get an A for the seduction bit, you failed in some others as well. She turned and tried spot her foe and shouted. How can you be alive? My kiss can kill any man. Well, as you have found out, I am no ordinary man, and if you think I am pulling your chain, why don't I kiss you for a change? That surprised the female supervillain, as no one was crazy enough to try kissing her of their own free will. But somehow this guy was immune to her kiss, which was impossible as she was the only one able to make the antidote for all the poisons she unleashed with her lips. She turned and there was the man before her, grinning once more, and before she could react, he kissed her and he was not dropping dead at all. His kiss was light and yet it seemed to be strong and masculine, and that had a very interesting effect on her as he pressed his lips a bit more on her own and he still was not dropping dead at all. She even felt him lick her lips as well with his tongue. He then replied in a very teasing tone as if he could sense that he had somehow knocked her senseless. Come on, Ivy-chan, put some more power in the kiss. You're not getting flustered by the fact that I am a man who's immune to your kiss of death, are you? She pushed him away and he laughed gently and spoke in a teasing tone. You are getting flustered. You're blushing so hard your face is like a rose, like your hair. That adds to the beauty you've already got, you know. Care to try again, Ivy-chan? I promise I'll show you how to kiss better if you let me. Ivy did not wait to try and figure things out as she shouted as her plants began to react to her emotions. No, I will not accept this. Stop him, my darlings. The plants moved at their mistress's commands and Naruto managed to avoid them, and this time around he was not going to let Ivy's pets get to him. He quickly took out one of his swords and began to cut down the vines that were trying to get to him. He saw that Ivy was looking at him in utter horror and confusion. The first emotion was no doubt since he was killing her plant pets, and the second emotion was there due to the fact that he was still alive. Truth be told, the reason, or rather reasons, that he was still alive was his more than ample vitality, bloodline, senjutsu training, and the chakra given to him by Kurama. But he was not going to reveal that for any reason, as he was enjoying the situation a little too much. Poison ivy was still sending the vines at him and he cut them down until he decided to make a move as he suddenly faded from the view of Ivy. She backed away, only to bump into him as she turned around to backhand him. Naruto ducked the attack and was soon before Ivy and he quickly kissed her again. Once more Ivy was shocked to see that he was not dropping dead or screaming in pain from the toxins she normally would have unleashed via contact and it was becoming difficult for her to react. Naruto then spoke to her huskily into her ear as he broke the contact with her lips. You know, I can respect the whole idea of protecting nature and all that, but I am still going to stop you since what you are going to is going to kill people. You think killing them is going to be the answer. Ivy looked at Naruto darkly as she replied. They are harming the environment. Killing nature. You think that you can do better than what I am doing. You'll be surprised what being less violent can bring you, Ivy-chan. I know all there is about you and what you used to do and who you used to be. You're taking this love for nature a little too far, don't you think? Ivy snorted and tried to launch another series of kicks at Naruto, who could see that despite her experience, she had not ever faced anyone who could fight her without being hampered by her poisons. All the while, she spoke to him and she was frowning a great deal as she was no doubt getting annoyed by the fact that she was not yet able to hit him. What do you care? No doubt you think you can exploit nature just like them. They ignore the fact that this world is fragile and they can do what they like. I am the only one who can protect nature. She deserves to be protected. And you think killing is going to do that? Especially when you consider the fact that what you will do can kill people who are not part of your plans. You think that your attack will only target the ones you want in this factory. What happens when innocent people are poisoned in the long run or killed by what you intend to do? The factory workers there have no idea about what their company is doing and they are only working there to earn money to pay for their bills, pay their taxes, feed house and clothe their families. Do they deserve to die just for doing what they can to take care of their families and give a future for them? Naruto stopped attacking Ivy at this point as she looked back at him as he spoke seriously. You may target those who you feel commit crimes towards nature, but have you ever considered the fact that you could also be attacking people who either do not know it or were just trying to go about with their lives and had no idea about it? I know about the accident that gave you your powers, but I can bet that there was a cost to it as well. If there is something I learned in my life, there's always a cost to having power. You don't know what you are talking about. Leave me alone. I know that your accident denied you ever being able to have kids and I know that the idea of never being able to have children is a fate most if not all women think is worse than death. Because losing the ability to have children takes away the ability to bring new life into the world, which is why women are the ones who are able to have children and it's never the men who can do that. That's why you care deeply for nature. You care for plants because they are the only things you can nurture and grow yourself. They're taking the place of those who you could have called your family, aren't they? You protect nature because you want to be able to feel like a mother when you can never be one yourself. Ivy glared at him and then lashed out with the plants once more. Naruto however evaded them and he replied. I struck a nerve, didn't I, Ivy-chan? Shut up. You don't know anything about me. Naruto moved and grabbed her fist and replied. I might not know you, but I do know how important nature is. If you want me to prove my point then let me show you. Ivy did not understand why but he was serious and she replied. If you're lying to me, I'll make you regret it, even if you are indeed immune to my poisons. Naruto nodded and then spotted a dying plant in a pot, no doubt left behind and was already nothing more than a shriveled little thing in poor soil. It was the perfect test subject for his little demonstration and he took it before him as he sat down cross-legged. Ivy watched as Naruto focused into himself and accessed the growing reserve of purified chakra he got from Kurama. The energy was still very potent and Kurama was willing to part with portions of it once in a while and his hands were coated in deep blue chakra energy. What the? Ivy was surprised as she suddenly saw the glowing energy coming from the Hokage's hands and it seemed to make the air feel alive for some reason. She felt her body somehow react to the energy in a rather pleasant way and she looked to see that her plants seemed to be calmed by the energy. But what really got her attention was the plant that Naruto had found as Naruto placed his hands with the energy on either side of the plant. The once dead and decaying thing actually began to grow again. The eco-terrorist watched in shock as the plant began to gain new life, the bark became healthy against, the branches grew longer and stronger, leaves sprouted out, and beautiful violets came from the plant. In a few moments what was once a dead and gone plant that made her furious at humans who cared little for life was brought back to life by this man. Naruto grinned a bit as he took the plant and channeled some more yang chakra into the soil to make it more healthy. He then got up and moved to a stunned Ivy and gave her the blooming plant as he spoke next to her. Here you go, Ivy-chan, I think this plant will do well under your care. Ivy touched the plant, trying to see if the whole thing was some illusion and she was being tricked, but there was no trick at all. She could sense that the plant before her was truly healthy and blooming. The soil that was in the pot also felt different, the soil seemed to be alive and tingled with energy and could be strong enough to sustain the plant for months despite the fact that it should be already barren. She studied the plant again and seeing that the plant was indeed real she looked at Naruto and spoke. How did you do this? Naruto grinned and replied. Now that would be telling Ivy-chan, after all even a man has got to have some secrets, right? What I can say is that the energy I have is unique to me, and when I use it, I can affect life and nature itself in a positive way. Care to feel it as well, Ivy-chan? Naruto gently placed his hand on Ivy's cheek, and to the redhead's surprise, the energy that she felt from the Hokage's hand seemed to make her feel a level of warmth and sensation that felt very pleasant, almost to the point that she actually moaned. She realized that in a moment and looked at Naruto, who grinned a bit more and even gave her a very knowing smirk. You like that, don't you, Ivy-chan? Ivy looked at him and spoke seriously. How are you able to do all of that? Are you a meta-human? No, though I have no clue what meta-human means just yet, but as you can guess, I'm not your average human. You know, if you want to make a contribution to nature, you make sure to get people on your side for once instead of scaring the living daylights out of them or killing them. I mean seriously, Ivy-chan, you have a lot of power already, but you can't expect people to change their ways right off the bat. The more you fight like a terrorist, the more likely you make enemies. Try having some allies on your side for a bit, see how it goes, since the more allies and less enemies you have, the better off you might be in the long run. You expect me to side with the people who are taking nature for granted. Not all people take nature for granted, you know. Some of them know that if nature gets ruined, then where will they go from here? There are people who care about nature as much as you do, and despite that they are not always listened to, they do get things done. Just try to defeat your foes without killing them. I kill my foes too, of course, but only when I have to protect my precious people or to keep innocent people from being hurt. Besides, if you have the law on your side and not on their side, wouldn't it be a lot easier for you to do what you want and defend nature, since at least you don't have to worry about Batman and the cops as well as the government? Ivy thought it over and had to admit that the Hokage did have a point there. It was at times easier if the law was on one side and not digging its talons into the sides of said person. And while she was a radical, there were others like her, like those men and women willing to give the Japanese fishermen a serious headache when they go for harpooning whales. She did not really have a deep liking for whales, but she understood the reasons behind their actions and she could respect their willingness to risk being labeled as pirates. And while they had to follow the laws when they carried a flag of another nation on their missions, those same laws prevented them from being prosecuted on sight by their foes since they did not want to cause an international incident. However, that still left the blonde before her as she spoke towards him. And what about you, Hokage? What exactly are you going to do with me? Naruto replied with a smirk. Obviously, I am only going to stop you from killing people even if they are guilty of what you feel are crimes against nature. If you try to fight them without killing them unless you have to, that might not bother me too much. But when you harm innocent people in your vendetta intentionally, that when the kid gloves are off, Ivy-chan. And truth be told, compared to the others I have dealt with, you are going to be in serious trouble with them than just me. I pretty much leave you to your own devices unless you cross the line. I might like nature, but I am not going to kill people intentionally for it, since you forget that people are part of nature's plans too, even if humans are the dangerous ones. There are humans who can save nature too, just like you, though not to that level. I'm not exactly human anymore, you do know that, right? Yeah, but you have the heart of a human. You can be a force of nature for sure. Heck, by all rights you could be ranked as a nature goddess with those powers of yours, but you have a human mind, body, heart and senses. And humans know when to punish and when to nurture. You might have gotten these powers at an accident, but you can use them to protect and heal just as much as you can harm and kill. If you can become more than you are and have allies on your side, I have a feeling your mission will be less difficult. Plus you can recover what it means to care for all life, not just plants. Naruto then grinned a bit more perversely as he replied. Besides that, I can help you in another fashion. Ivy raised her eyebrow as he moved forward and whispered into her ear. I can let you experience what it means to be a beautiful woman who is attractive to a man, Ivy-chan. And that means in a very physical fashion if you feel so inclined. That got Ivy to blush bright red to the point her face was like a rose, and she looked at him in shock as he smiled even more. Did I get you hot and bothered by any chance, Ivy-chan? Please say yes. You can't possibly be serious. Naruto grinned and replied as he moved to Ivy once more, and she did not react negatively as he traced her lips with his finger. Oh, but I am Ivy-chan. After all, I am quite possibly the only man at this point who is immune to your toxins and poisons, as well as your pheromones. But I doubt you need the last power to get my attention on you, and there's the fact that I am not an enemy of yours unless you make me into one. I also have the power to nurture nature as well as caring for it as you do, though in a more moderate fashion. Plus, my skills can help you gather all the evidence you need to nail enemies to the wall. And there's the fact that I have a lot of experience when it comes to making women very happy as well. You might not be able to have a chance to be a mother in the human way, but that hardly means you can't be a woman in the human way either. Naruto stopped to let that all sink into Ivy's head, and he replied as he could see that she had taken it all in. Now then, if you plan to go ahead with your previous intent, I am going to fight seriously, and you can bet Ivy-chan that this might not end well for you since you can't defeat me with poisons and toxins, and as you have seen, I am not in the same league as Batman. Or you can call this off and take what I suggested into consideration, and if you need convincing, then I am more than willing to do just that. Later. As Naruto got out of the sewers, he swore that he was going to clean up and shower after all that. He had smelled pretty horrid things before, but a Gotham sewer was one experience he had no intention of repeating. But at least he managed to stop Ivy from her plans and hopefully made her change her ways. He doubted that one night was going to cut it, but there was no sense in trying it outright. Besides, he was not joking about letting Ivy have some male company for once in her life. After all, he was not an enemy of hers unless she did something that could harm innocent people. He respected nature in a fashion that was similar to her, and he was naturally immune to her poisons and toxins, so dying from her touch or kiss would not happen anytime soon. Besides, he would have to admit that the idea of being intimate with someone that good-looking and dangerous had a very nice charm to it. That was something that Kurama commented on. You certainly stepped into it now, brat. I can't believe you actually want that to happen between the two of you. I gave my word after all, Kurama, and you know me, I back my words with action. HMPH. I know that, Kit. That's the reason you and I have managed to work together well for the past many years and the reason I learned to respect and even like you. Still, you have grown some serious balls, as you humans call it. You do know that if it was not for the facts that your Uzumaki bloodline gives you the vitality and stamina, your senjutsu training which you have been working on like mad, and my ability to heal you of injury and sickness, her kiss could have killed you right. I know and I like it, and I can certainly enjoy showing her how to use those charms of her better. Kurama laughed at that and replied. And you have the gall to call me a pervert. You're turning into a pervert who flirts with women who try to kill you. I personally find that to be a weird balance between brave and suicidal. Naruto laughed at that and moved on while switching back to his senjutsu mode to scan the area around him, and he could not help but smirk in surprise when he felt a very familiar chakra signature, and then 3 familiar ones. Well now, we have company. Batman, Robin, Batgirl, and Superman. They no doubt are trying to track us down, Kurama. Figures they would be interested. You left the impression after all on them, so, any plans yet? Let them make a first move and we string them along, see how far they are willing to go to try and get us. Don't you mean you? Keep in mind you have not exactly told them about me and the fact that it makes you a Jinchuriki, remember? And I will not unless something convinces me to tell me otherwise. Besides, telling them I got a demon fox inside me ain't exactly common knowledge around here yet. Plus they'll either think I am joking or I deserve to be in the loony bin. And no way am I going to let myself get locked up with the nuts that call that place home. Bruce looked through some special binoculars and spoke to both Tim and Barbara. Looks like our Hokage friend has gone away from the sewers. Tim raised an eyebrow at that and replied. What could he have been doing in there? Barbara shook her head and replied. Don't know, but that's where the thieves were supposed to have been seen going to last time I checked the reports. The fact they were acting like that must mean they were being controlled. Don't bother with that. I looked through the sewers, the crooks are there and they look poisoned. Batman decided to check the bodies out later. If what he had seen on the stolen list was accurate, then that meant Poison Ivy was on the move again. As much as he liked nature due to his time traveling and training, he did not like the extremes that Ivy did to protect it. He personally disliked it when she nearly killed his friend Harvey Dent before he turned into Two-Face, nor when she nearly turned Alfred into a plant-human hybrid. He then had an idea as he took out one of his tracers and gave it to Superman and spoke. How good were you in baseball? Superman looked a bit confused for a moment and then nodded in agreement as he was quickly able to grasp just what was it that Bruce had in mind. He pitched his arm up and managed to weigh in how much strength he needed for the distance and how to avoid injuring the man as well as allowing the tracer to latch onto him without becoming a bullet. Not too hard for him to do when one considered the fact that Clark had a very advanced brain and the power to use said brain as well. He tossed it and soon the TRCER sailed through the air, propelled by the Kryptonian strength, and he saw it with his microvision as it managed to land on the coat of the Hokage. Just as the man took off and he replied to Bruce. Got him. That was the cue for the rest of them to go after the Hokage as the man was now on the move. Perhaps they could finally get the answers they were in need of. Later. The four of them managed to track down the Hokage to a hotel, and as soon as they were there, Bruce nodded that not was the time to go in and find the man. But once they got there, he was out, no doubt going to grab a meal of some sort as it was the right time for dinner. This allowed them to look the place over. Bruce entered the hotel room that was owned by the Hokage and wondered just what the status was of this masked hero when it came to financing. The apartment might not be high class, but to be able to be here in a well-known hotel in good comfort suggested that the guy was well-funded and therefore was not to be taken lightly. He was also curious about the way his weapons were made, as the recovered ninja stars were authentic and were not like the kind of things one found in a novelty store. He was not alone in this search, as Robin, Batgirl, and Superman were there with Clark scanning the place. They all had taken a very strong interest on the man. Clark to find out more of this man who had managed to find out his identity. Barbara was curious on what was the guy's story, and Robin wanted to see if this guy was as good as Bruce without him using those powers of his. Bruce looked at the room and suspected that the guy was hiding more than just his identity as he looked over the drawers, as he did not help but feel that something was going on. It was a feeling in his mind and gut, and if there was one thing his training had taught him, it was to trust at times the feelings in his gut. That was when they discovered the tracer on the coat of the Hokage, with a note in it. They took the note and read it. Hello there. I figured you would find this hotel room of mine sooner or later, Batman, and no doubt that your companions are with you, and I wager to guess old Big Blue Superman is with you too. You might be wondering how I know Superman is with you, right? Let's just say that someone with his more than unique energy signature is pretty darn hard to miss, especially for a guy like me. Couple that with his ability to see through things except lead, you would have found me already, only I knew you were coming, so I decided to scram in a very different fashion and leave something, and your team might be able to hear people coming a mile away, but I have learned some techniques that trump the training, and no, I am not going to tell, so don't bother asking. Anyhow, it was not unexpected you would find me, so I decided to make myself scarce. If there's one thing I learned in my more than interesting life that kept me from being buried in a coffin, is to always have a backup plan. And I recommend you forget trying to find the tailor of my coat just in case you think to find him and question who he made it for, because like that letter I gave Superman, that coat's about to go bye-bye. See ya. Hokage. That was the only warning that Batman and the others had, as the jacket suddenly began to burn and soon was reduced into nothing but a pile of ash, along with the tracer. That was enough to tell Bruce and company that their chance to find him was long dead and gone, and with the room's fire alarm going off from the smoke coming from the ruined jacket, there was going to be too many people in the area for them to get a precise idea where the Hokage had gone. Clark had to shake his head and spoke to the others. How the heck did he find out that I was around? Bruce shook his head at that and replied. I am not very sure on how he did it, but it seems that we are going to have to leave before we're found out. Tim, can you come back here and find out just who rented the room? Already on it first thing tomorrow morning. I want to find out just who this guy really is. Clark had a feeling that it was not going to be that simple as he looked at the now reduced pile of destroyed cloth as they soon got out of the room before hotel security came into the room. Outside. Naruto grinned a bit as he was a very fair distance away from the hotel that he had left his coat in. It was sad that he had to lose that coat, but that was why he always carried spares in his scrolls. He then moved away from the place and was happy that he secretly planned an escape route out of the hotel in advance. After all, that was not his real base of operations, and he was going to his real base right now. The blonde shinobi moved quickly over the buildings and resorted to using his kunai with the wires, and soon arrived near an old steel mill that was left behind by the company that once owned it, and it was outside of the city limits. This was his real base of operations, and he had made it as comfortable as he could in the metal there, while old was useful for making spare weapons. He had been friends with Tenten, and she did teach him on how to make his own weapons and gear, so why the company left behind good quality metal was something he was confused with. And since this place was deemed off limits and no longer of any value, it was going to destroyed in a month from now, more than ample time for him to make the place his base while in Gotham. And when they demolished it, the city government was going to unwittingly erase any trace of him ever being there in the first place. Their lose and his gain, he supposed, and as he went in, he decided to make sure that before the last week was over, he was going to make things very interesting before he left the city. The rest of next week for Naruto was downright entertaining, as he had managed to avoid getting on the radar of Batman and company while tangling against Selina Kyle. The woman was certainly a lot better prepared than last time they met, and she was more than willing to go all out to try and evade him when she finally robbed someone. The reason he was able to locate her was namely due to his senjutsu training and how to sense chakra. After sensing Selina's chakra energy signature and narrowing it down, he now was able to track her, but she was not going to make it the least bit easy. She apparently had been busy getting herself into tip-top shape, and they were soon moving over the rooftops, and there was no doubt in his mind that they had to be careful since Batman might be around. The first day of the between them had her stealing a golden scepter with jewels from a businessman's private collection, and he was able to arrive before anyone arrived on site, and soon the chase was on. The distance to the place where he would not chase her was fairly long, so she was going to push it as much as she could. Naruto and Selina had a heck of a race between them, and as they faced one another, the female thief was really giving Naruto a very interesting time as she did what she could to fight him off or evade him. But it was not long before he managed to switch her sachet bag with another one of the same make, which turned out to be filled with a cat plush toy this time. Selina found out about the switch when she checked the bag as he appeared right in front of her while hanging upside down on the roof of the building that she had tried to hide in. The woman knew that as per the agreement between them, she was going to reveal her face. Once she did so, Naruto whistled wolfishly and called her one very attractive woman, and he was impressed at how she managed to keep herself this good looking. He then returned the golden specter to the owner, though in this case, the man turned out to have been something of the fencer for some wild cats that was supposed to be off limits. That was more than enough to explain just why Selena targeted the man. Naruto had some entertainment at the end of it when he spotted none other than Bane, who was currently going in to fight Batman and his group, though the three had to deal with Bane's goons as the man was currently running a drug-running business. The man was certainly large, and despite the size, this guy certainly knew how to move and fight, and while Batman seemed to be a bit troubled, he was more than willing to go all out to fight the muscle-bound criminal. He did not interfere yet, as he wanted to see just how Batman would do in this kind of the fight. And he was not the least disappointed, as Batman finally proved to be as capable as before, despite the fact that at times, Bane tossed him around like a rag doll. Robin and Batgirl were there as well, and he could not help but nod in respect at the way the two fought alongside Batman, though his eyes were locked in on Batgirl as he wolf whistled mentally at the way she moved. He was very interested in using her as a new character in his novel series once he was out of the area before he was going to be found out. But not before seeing the team defeat Bane and allow the man to taken away by the police, and no doubt going back to that lovely place, Arkham Asylum. On the next day, Naruto decided to get to work writing on his newest novel, and he was more than willing to use what he had been doing, or rather done so far, with both Ivy and Selena. His very much accepted perverted nature already going into overdrive as he wrote the stories that involved Selena and Pamela as well as himself. Though he usually changed the names and also made sure to make some alterations to make things a lot more interesting and avoid arousing the ire of said ladies. He was very interested to see just how the people were going to react the very second these stories came out into circulation. And once he was done, he was off to finally continue the next phase of his competition with the gorgeous Selena Kyle as night fell. However, along the way he ran into one really oddball but still attractive woman who rode one really weird contraption if he ever saw one, and that was saying something since he had seen his fair share of crazy contraptions back home. The blonde spotted the woman known as Roxy Rocket, a daredevil stunt woman who had way too many close calls and was an adrenaline junkie to the extreme. The woman had managed to do a daring robbery and was cruising along the streets, scaring the living daylights out of people as he managed to keep out of sight and get dressed. The Gotham PD tried to chase her and stop her rampage, but it was also here that Naruto appeared. Roxy was a bit surprised at the appearance he made, namely since he was currently in his wind armor jutsu, but tried to play chicken with him and even gave him a kiss and a dare to catch her. The blonde was not in the mood to play catch the woman, so he decided to put an end to this chase. He quickly fired a pair of shuriken into the engine, and that slowed Roxy down, allowing him to get ahead of her and then intercept her with a quick mid-air grab, as he then moved to fire one of his wire-armed kunai and then swing over to the nearby sign. He placed her down and then spoke to her about trying to get herself turned into a proverbial smear on the wall, which was the fate of her little ride as it was now burning on the wall. The woman, however, didn't seem to mind and even tried to come onto him. Apparently she got a rush facing him in aerial fighting and was even asking him if he had a girlfriend. Naruto didn't know whether to laugh or snort. Sure, Roxy was interesting and certainly a sight, but she was a bit odd in his mind. And that was saying something, since Naruto had a very long history of meeting people who were beyond borderline crazy. He decided to partially lie and say that he was seeing someone, to which Roxy asked if his girlfriend was as wild and interesting as she was. To which he replied she was. That did not make Roxy change her tune, however, as she replied that she was going to prove that she was a lot wilder. Naruto snorted a bit, and despite Roxy being charming, which was not too hard to do with the way she dressed, he finally managed to restrain her and leave, just as the cops came in. The woman reminded a bit too much of Anko, who actually flirted with him a number of times, even though he was technically married. Though unlike Roxy, Anko knew when not to push her luck and merely enjoyed the company. He also evaded the police and soon was out of sight. As night fell, Naruto managed to move out and evade the police patrols and soon used his senjutsu training. He soon found Selena and soon found her, stealing a golden cat mask from the Gotham Museum, and off she went, forcing him to follow. This time, however, he was not alone in the pursuit, though it was the GPD, and soon he and the police were closing in on Selena. The cops had a hard time in keeping up with Selena as he watched from the sidelines, but the blonde thief then managed to enter a series of abandoned apartments, and soon the police were forced to search the place building by building. That was more than good for Naruto, as he was in senjutsu mode and tracking Selena. The two of them met, and this time, instead of fighting him, Selena tried to take the seduction route, and boy was she unleashing the charm this time around. The two chased one another, and despite the decrepit conditions of the apartments, they were doing all right. At one point, the blonde thief actually decided to kiss him a bit while rubbing her body on his body, more than enough to get him interested. She even ran his hands on his thighs, a first on his part. She even tried to place his hands on her breasts of all things, and he was not going to complain, as Selena was really hamming it up. Not to mention that she was even willing to use her tongue on him on a few instances, as she also tried to get away from him when she could while evading the police. That was more than enough to tell Naruto that she was really willing to do what she could in order to get away from him. He was not far behind in the seduction game, as he was more than willing to give as good as he got. When she thought she had evaded him, he would appear and whisper into her ear from behind while gently smacking her well-shaped butt at the same time. That action he did made her cry out a bit at his willingness to do that and briefly glare at him before trying to reverse the whole thing. She would even try to use her whip at him, but he merely gave her smiles and playful catcalls. He even managed to catch her whip and then pull her to him, and he would catch her and shamelessly rub his face on her bust. That was more than enough to make Selena gasp at his actions, as this was something she had not expected. He even placed his thigh between her legs, making her raise an eyebrow at him for his actions. This went on for a while until Selena escaped after managing to tie him up and left, unaware of the fact that Naruto had managed to get into her sachet halfway through their little romp through the apartments and place in a simple but very cute cat-themed mask which he had managed to buy from before. As she left, he freed himself and finally surprised Selena in the pier by revealing the switch, and she groaned a bit as she knew what that meant. The next day, they were on their date, and it was rather interesting as Naruto decided to dress nice for the occasion. After all, this was a date and he had to look his best for his date. He did that with his wives when he went with them on either single dates or in group dates. The only difference he made was to make his hair move down and not be spiky. He dressed in a simple but very classy dress suit, and Selena appeared wearing a white dress with simple but elegant high-heeled shoes and had a purse as well. He managed to get them into one of the more popular restaurants in Gotham, and soon it was a date which was rather nice. Selena actually stated that despite his change in hairstyle, he was not bad looking, and while she asked him if he was sure that he could tolerate being seen with her since he was technically a teenager and she was older than him, he laughed a bit. He then replied that considering the modern world's view of things, there was nothing too wrong about this sort of thing, and despite his young look, he was a lot older than she realized. That comment naturally made Selena raise her eyebrow at the comment but decided to let the whole thing. The two of them began to enjoy the day, and despite the fact that there were some comments directed at him by the men in sight and hearing range, and the same to Selena, it was not all bad. The woman managed to tell him about the events that led to her fascination with cats and her love for all kinds, either domesticated or wild. Naruto decided to also trade a bit of his own history, namely how he actually enjoyed gardening and also working with some animals. He even mentioned that incident with the cat that belonged to the feudal lord's wife and how the thing had given him and his friends a hell of a chase. Selena could not help but picture the sight of that and be slightly amused, but that amusement only grew when Naruto explained just how wily the cat was and how it had tried countless times to turn his face into confetti and also make him go way off the mark. The blonde shinobi also spoke about the tiger he and Hikaru eventually called friend and traveled with, as well as his encounters with other creatures. Naruto then mentioned that despite things he actually had an affinity to toads and foxes, making Selena amused considering the fact he had used a frog puppet to fool her the first time they had met one another. Naruto did not reveal anything else about himself but merely used a cover name, going by the name of Nathan Stein, who had stayed in Japan for a number of years and recently returned to America to get used to seeing the world after being in Japan for so long. To prove it, he even used his real language, which was certainly Japanese to the ear of most people, something that Selena nodded to. This went on for a while as Selena explained that while she knew that being caught was always a danger as a thief, she lived for the thrill it gave her and she relished the chance to show her abilities as well as gain gold things to enhance her lifestyle. But she also pointed out that she took care to avoid engaging the police and law enforcement, as well as avoiding harming people unless she had no other choice. And even if she did get forced into a situation where violence was her only chance, she would not make a mistake and kill someone even if it was accidental. That was because she disliked killing unless there was no other alternative, and the fact was that if she killed someone, I would only make things worse for her. And she used the money to obviously fund charitable causes and to help the animals she grew fond of. As dinner came, both of them enjoyed the meal, and before they parted at the end of the night, Naruto told her that he was looking forward to the last day, and she nodded as she did find him charming, but not that charming, to which Naruto took no offense, and soon they were off to their respective hideouts. As night fell, the chase was on between them, though this time around, Selena took to robbing what was a priceless painting from a collection piece. Naruto had to admit that the choice of target was new until he learned that not only was the painting valuable, but it had the images of Bast and Sekhmet on them, two Egyptian goddesses with cat heads on human bodies. That was enough to make Kurama comment that this Selena woman took her love of felines a little too far, to which Naruto had to agree as they were now moving after Selena. And this time, the blonde female thief was going all out on trying to lose him. They were moving from the vault where she stole the painting and into the social district of Gotham. No doubt she was trying to use the place to lure him off her trail. If she could not evade him, fight him, or seduce him, then she was going to distract him in a very different fashion. The sights and sounds were certainly a step up from what he was used to, and he had to be careful since he had to avoid being seen as well. He had to give Selena credit for the deception, and this time around, he was going to have to be careful since it turned out that the woman had decided to cover herself with some form of scent masking on her outfit. She really went all out, and he could guess that the idea of dressing up for him for picture taking was not something she had in mind. But he was not going to give up any time soon as he pursued Selena, relying on his senjutsu to track her down. But it was here that a number of thugs decided to attack one of the nearby theaters, and that was enough to force Naruto to stop and go in to find out what was going on. Apparently a number of the wealthy Gotham class were watching a brand new show, and the thugs intended to rob them. This was enough to make him stop and get into the act, as the people were being forced to give up their money, jewels, credit cards and the like, though why would the people carry those he would never know. The thugs were also interested in holding the performer prisoner, a drop-dead gorgeous raven-haired woman in some seriously attractive female stockings and a rather interesting-looking suit. He saw that the name of the performer was Zatanna, and when he directed his senjutsu senses he was surprised to find that she had a bonfire of chakra in her, as well as a level of energy that he did not recognize well enough. This woman had some serious powers and apparently was not using them yet, and some of the thugs were interested in her, but instead of cowering, the woman fought back like a cornered tigress. This was enough to make Naruto step in, as he quickly tossed one of his special kunai to appear into the front of the thugs and Zatanna as he launched himself at them with serious attacks on them all. That surprised the people in the audience, as they had thought Batman and his team were there. Naruto could see that none of the thugs were that skilled, and he wiped the floor with them quickly enough. But one of them managed to get up and grab the magician from behind. He placed a knife on her throat, and that made Naruto all the more annoyed, as he knew that this was not good, and the police would not arrive in time, plus Selena was getting away. But he was surprised this time around as Zatanna used her wand and aimed upward to create a powerful blast of powder in the face that was precise. The man began to scream in pain and clutch his nose and eyes as Zatanna then gave the guy a solid kick to the balls, making Naruto raise an eyebrow, enough to distract him as another thug got up despite the beating to clobber him with a chair. Zatanna waved her wand a bit, making Naruto realize that the energy he sensed was active, and he turned to see the man being tied up by ropes. Where those ropes came from he had no idea, but he was impressed. He turned to Zatanna and asked her if she was fine, and the magic user replied, "I am all right. You're the Hokage, aren't you? Saw me on TV, Miss Zatanna." "Yep. Got to say that the change in wardrobe is nice. Anyway, thanks for your help here. Didn't think anyone was this crazy to attack. Money can make you do strange things. Anyway, got to go. Hope to meet you again, Miss Zatanna, and nice kick by the way." The raven-haired magician smirked and replied, "Just because I look like this doesn't mean I am helpless. Had previous experience creeps like them. And I hope to meet you again too. You've got some serious powers." And afterwards, Naruto went on with the chase, and despite the distance between him and Selena, he managed to catch her with the Hiroshin no Jutsu, his kunai wire, and chakra chain movements plus his speed. The two carried on with their race until they were in sight of the pier that was the safe haven, but Naruto was quickly able to react Selena and suddenly reach the special container she used to hide the painting in. The two managed to duke it out in a fight, but Naruto still managed to hold on, even with Selena using not just her claws but her whip as well. Naruto quickly took a few smoke bombs, and in a complete reversal of last time, he blinded her and moved in quickly through the smoke and made his move. Just as Selena got away from the smoke and soon they were facing each other, they fought once more, and soon it came to a point that they both fell off the building, and Naruto used his chakra chain to latch on the building and catch Catwoman as they looked at one another. The thief smiled at the rescue as he moved to the other building, and soon they were only a few steps away from the pier. Selena opened the container and rolled it open to find that she got only a blank sheet, and she looked at Naruto to reveal that he had the painting, meaning that he won. Selena sighed at this and knew that the jig was up, and looked at Naruto, who smiled warmly underneath his mask. 2 days later at night. Naruto was very happy with himself as he was now taking a train away from Gotham and heading out of the city. He decided to head back to Los Angeles and stay there for a while until he was done with what he needed to do for his books. In his bag were a number of pictures that had Selena Kyle as the model. The blonde woman was not too keen on it at first, but after some time, she agreed to it, and she wore a number of clothes and dresses that she had on hand that he found very nice. The party dress look, the simple business-like look, and a few others, all none threatening, but very attractive in Naruto's eye. But the highlights of the pictures included Selena wearing what was a two-piece swimsuit which was deep black with gold hoops, and also a simple one-piece suit that had oval shapes to reveal her stomach and back and managed to hold her bust. All of which were done alongside Isis in her apartment, and truth be told, Selena was quite surprised that her pet cat, a very discerning judge of character, actually liked Naruto. The blonde was also pleased that unlike the last cat he had to deal with, Isis did not try to turn his face to confetti, and that seemed to confirm to Selena that she could trust Naruto well enough. The whole thing took at least a few hours, all the way to lunch, for which he personally bought with his own money and even bought Isis a few treats of fish, making Selena smirk a bit at his attitude and the fact that he was a very nice guy, even though it was fairly obvious that he was no saint since she did catch him looking at her in a less than pure fashion. Still, once it was over, he made sure to keep his word, and for the last 3 days, he left her to her own devices if she ever decided to take back being Catwoman. Which was a good thing in his mind, and he made sure to not bother her again. It was not just Selena though. Apparently Ivy had taken a shot at his offer, and he had indeed helped her on a few things to get the factory closed down, and the owners swimming in so many legal problems and being protested that they decided to close down the factory. That also meant that Ivy could now take over and clean up the mess covertly. She was not too sold on the idea just yet, and he expected that to be the case, but that hardly meant that he and by extension Pamela did not get to try things out. And sure enough, he enjoyed teasing and flirting with Pamela, who reacted naturally enough, despite the fact that she was still unsure how to react to being with a man who was someone who could not be poisoned by her. He took things slowly and began to really heat things up between them a bit, so she was used to it, and despite her instance that this was not going to change her ways like that, her moaning and groaning was telling him that he was on the right path to something with her. It was not too long though, and despite her denials at times, he could tell that Pamela had enjoyed herself. That was why he made sure to tell her that he had decided to be on call for her if she ever needed someone to talk to as well as keep her company. It made the whole thing a lot more interesting, since one had to know the fact that he was the only man thus far who was not harmed by her in any stretch of the imagination. She replied that she would keep that in mind, but she warned him not to get any ideas. He also ran into Zatanna as she was getting her stuff loaded into her truck for another trip around the country, though in this case that was last night when he was able to find her. Someone with as much chakra as she did mixed with that other energy was not too hard to miss, and after some time chatting in his disguise, she decided to let him take some pictures of her, which she then signed with her in her costume, which to him was more than enough. The only problem he had before he packed up was meeting that massive figure of a zombie Solomon Grundy. The creature came barreling into a nearby train station that apparently had a shipment of gold being taken in. And on the same night as well as his meeting with Zatanna, so off he went to deal with the new foe that ruined this night of his. However, once he saw the being thrash through the guards and attack them and sensed that he was dead already, it brought back memories of his encounters with ghosts and undead, namely of Hidan and Kakazu, the immortal pair of Akatsuki. He disliked them immensely since they had killed Asuma and left Kurenai a widow and their son fatherless, and while it was something to expect given their lives as Konoha ninja, it hardly meant that they liked it. He personally fought Kakazu while Shikamaru personally defeated Hidan and sealed that bastard away. Solomon Grundy was not in the same league as those two, namely in the brains and justu department, but he was tough. He managed to stop him from harming any more guards, but had to resort to senjutsu to deal with this guy since the magical energy that kept him alive seemed to be affected by it. Naruto was not too sure what was it that brought this dude back to life, but he could tell that it was not the same as Kabuto and Orochimaru's impure world resurrection jutsu, so he was going to have to go all out. He and Grundy tore through the train station, and while the zombie got some hard hits in, the durability he got from his senjutsu form helped him even the odds as he landed blow after blow as well on the former living man. Grundy was less than pleased and tried to squash him more than once and used anything he could to swat him, which was why Naruto used his frog kumite style to knock him around even more until he reverted to something a lot more effective. He summoned the chakra he needed, and despite it not being his chakra affinity, this worked well enough on the undead as far as he had seen. Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu. The massive fireball slammed into Grundy and sent him screaming in absolute pain as Naruto quickly followed that up with a Rasengan attack that sent the massive zombie flying into a collection of fuel drums, and that was soon followed by a massive fireball of an explosion as the fuel went boom. As soon as that was over, off he went to go back to LA, but not before sending his newest novel to his employer, and this had the theme of the hero dealing with a woman with one serious green thumb, and a lady with a deep connection to cats, though he made sure to make some changes just to be on the safe side. As for Batman and company, they were still surprised at the news of Naruto's activities and wondered just how he had been able to avoid them for so long. But what really got the interest of the group were the reports of him fighting Grundy and unleashing a fireball from his mouth, according to witnesses who were not caught in the crossfire of the battle. Bruce knew that it took a lot of force to beat Grundy, and fire alone, while harmful, was not enough to kill the reanimated being. And that was enough to tell him that Grundy was not going to forget the Hokage or what he had done to him. Robin was not too happy, as it turned out the room was not even being rented by anyone, and that meant he was led by the nose, and that grated on the young crime fighter more than he cared to admit. There was also the report that some of the homeless people had said that Ivy was seen in the Hokage's company, and she seemed to be rather calm and seemed to be at ease with the man. That was something he had not expected and only served to confuse him even more, as he knew how she could easily kill with a kiss, so how the Hokage was alive around her added to the whole mess. As for Clark, the guy's ability to sense him before he could even see him confused the Kryptonian, since as far as he knew, he did not emit any energy waves that could be seen easily. This added more to the whole deal, and he knew that Bruce was not all too keen on things. The Hokage had now disappeared, as the last they had heard of him was that battle with Grundy, and as he gathered the reports for the Daily Planet, there was no doubts in his mind that sooner or later, things were going to come to a head. They were not the only ones to take notice, however. On an island far away from the modern world. Are you sure that you have been sensing those changes, Mala? Yes, my queen, every now and then, I sensed a shifting of the world's natural flow of energy, as if it was being taken to a central point, and then as soon as a large amount was taken, it stopped. It was as if someone or something is actually able to tap into the very flow of energy and redirect it. But it did not feel like the energy was being violated. How so? Almost as if the person or persons who did it was not fighting or bringing nature under his or their wills, but allowing it to flow into them and settle. That kind of skill is unlike what I have sensed before, but I have heard stories of people with magic being able to do such feats. I see. Mother, can it really be coming from man's world? I do not know, but as long as it is not being done here, we have little to fear. What happens out there is not our concern, daughter. We have no need to be concerned with the affairs of men. All right, mother, but I cannot help but be curious. You were always the curious one, my little sun and stars, but place that aside for now. Your sister is waiting for you in the training hall. Yes, mother.